All right, guys, welcome to the stream today. Go ahead and if you're joining us live for the live stream, let me know in the chat where you're watching from today. But we got a lot to cover. We're going to actually be talking about today kind of one theme and probably two different segments that'll turn into three standalone videos. For those that aren't familiar with our live streams, today we're going to talk in real time. There's no teleprompter, there's no script, there's no anything like that. We're going to chat about what we're talking about. So the live streams are going to go a little slower, but every single segment is going to be turned into a standalone video. So if you just want to get straight to the content, you don't want the community chat, anything like that, those videos may be a better fit for you. But here's the theme that we're talking about on today's stream. We're really discussing this idea of really asking a question from two different sides. Same question, but two different sides. Why do scandals and spiritual abuse keep happening so often in the church? Why do they keep happening? Why aren't they stopping? Why aren't they slowing down? And what would stop them? What would slow them down? And we're going to look at that question from two different angles, kind of like we're turning a coin. And we're going to use a few different articles that came out that we haven't gotten to yet, that came out in July from the Roy's report, that I think illustrate kind of what's going on in a few different ways. And we're going to look to some solutions as well to what we can do for this, because I do think there's a lot of good happening in the church. I think in the church world, there are moves being made that will slow down the amount of scandals that we're seeing, that I think will stop spiritual abuse. But it's going to take all of us. This is not something that just church leaders have to do. I actually believe the greatest solutions, the best solutions, the most practical solutions to stopping spiritual abuse in the church actually happens from us, individual believers in the church. You don't have to have a title. You don't have to be on a board. You don't have to be called pastor. You don't have to be ordained or licensed or any of these other things. We all have a voice and we all have some power to really bring lasting change, lasting reform, to protect people, and to restore the reputation of the church to being the hands and feet of Jesus, good and loving God. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to look at that from both sides. So there's going to be negatives, there's going to be positives, but I hope that I leave you today, before we're done, with some very practical solutions, how you can be a part of the solution right where you are at. But I think this is going to be a really good conversation. I will go ahead and see who we've got in the chat today. Angela says hello from Philly. Thank you so much, Angela, for watching all the way from Philadelphia. That's making me crave that Philly cheesesteak from Gino's. I have not been there in a while. Thank you so much for watching. Linda says, I'm watching from Phoenix, Arizona. I love Phoenix, Linda, in the fall and in the winter. In the middle of the summer, I do not envy you right now. Last time I was in Phoenix in the summer, I said, this is a totally different place in the summer than I experienced the rest of the year. Let me see. And then Andrea says, I'm watching from Texas. So as more people join the live stream throughout the day today, if you're joining while we're live, let me know where you're watching from. It's always helpful just to know where people are joining us from, because man, all over the world, not just the United States, but all over the world, people are joining these conversations. And again, I think the conversation today is going to be a good one. Something else, you can let me know that you guys can talk about it, because again, always feel free in the chat, ask any questions you have. Share your thoughts, push back on something. If you feel like I've gotten it wrong, in between the segments, we're going to try to chat as much as we can today. So I would love to hear your thoughts. But one of the things I'd love to hear kind of on the front end is your thoughts on this question. Why do church scandals happen so often? Why is spiritual abuse happening so often? Why is it not stopping? What would stop it? So if you have thoughts on that before we get rolling, I'd love to hear your thoughts and not just my thoughts, because we're not going to talk about every reason this happens today. We're not going to talk about every reason it's not stopping today, but we're going to talk about what I believe is probably the most common reason, the most practical reason why spiritual abuse and scandals are happening so often. And simultaneously, it's the easiest, most practical thing that we can do to actually stop this, to stem this, to turn the tide, and to really restore the church, not just the reputation of the church, but truly restore the church as being the hands and feet of Jesus. Let me see. Angela says so many better cheesesteaks here than Geno's. Geno's has always been my favorite, but that's where I was told to go. You got to give me some recommendations for the next time that I am there. We were actually in New York not too long ago, and a lot of times, sometimes we fly, but a lot of times we drive through there. So I'll try. Give me some recommendations, and I'll try to get another one because I love a good cheesesteak. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here today. Let's go ahead and we'll dive into segment one. Like I said, segment one may end up being two standalone videos because we're going to talk about kind of one big picture idea, but we're also going to talk in the middle of it about one specific instance of spiritual abuse that I think highlights what's going on and why this keeps happening, why it grows to the proportions that it does. So this first segment may be a couple of standalone videos. We may pull those out, but I think it's going to be a good conversation. We'll do the first segment. We'll stop, have a conversation about anything you guys have put in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and do the last segment, and hopefully we will have time to chat after that as well. So go ahead. Any questions? Anything that you got from today's episode, put in the chat, but also throughout, if there's something you want me to cover, something you want us to talk about on live stream, questions that you have, let me know. It may be questions we answer in a future live stream. It may also be questions like simple Q&A that we can do today. So always feel free to put those things in the chat as well. But with that, let's go ahead and let's jump into segment one of today's stream. Why does spiritual abuse and cover-ups keep happening in the church? This, guys, is honestly one of the most common questions that I get from absolutely heartbroken people who love the church, but they hate the abuse that they're seeing. And that's many of you who are watching right now. Maybe you haven't asked me that question, but you've asked yourself, why does this keep happening? And the reality is the answer is quite simple, but it's also quite uncomfortable. Spiritual abuse happens most when accountability is absent. That is simple, but it is a huge idea. Spiritual abuse most often is going to happen where accountability is absent. And the reality is that church accountability is the best defense that we have against church abuse. If we want to stop church abuse, we've got to be more accountable and we've got to pursue accountability. And one of the things that brought this to mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys today. One of the things that brought this to mind was a recent article that I read by Lance Ford. If you're not familiar, Lance is I think he's a former board member now. He's doing some work with the Roy's Report, was a board member for them. He's been on some of their podcasts. But Lance wrote an opinion piece on the Roy's Report at the end of July. And essentially, Lance just has this question. He's asking questions about accountability, but the article was framed how to build a leadership culture that provides real accountability. And that piqued my interest because I was already thinking about doing, a live stream and a video on these topics of accountability. Accountability is one of the things that we talk about most at SAI with churches. Just this week, I had somebody interview me about the Safe Church Pledge and why churches should join the pledge. They asked me a lot of tough questions, but some of those questions were about accountability because accountability is one of the biggest pieces of the Safe Church Pledge, one of the things we talk about most often. So when I saw Lance write this, I read this article, and guys, it is a very good article. We'll go through a lot of it today. We may miss some pieces. I highly encourage you to go to the Roy's Report and check that out. But he says, how to build a culture that provides real accountability in the church. Moral failure rarely happens in isolation. He says it grows in environments where accountability is absent and image is everything. And I think he's spot on there, okay? Moral failure does not happen in a vacuum. Moral failure is going to happen because there's not accountability. There's not enough accountability. And usually he's right. Image matters. Like they care so much about how they look. They care so much about how the church looks or how they're perceived that you hide anything that makes you look bad, and anything that could make you look bad, there's nobody to hold you accountable over it. So of course you're going to hide these things to protect yourself. And a lot of times these leaders are not going to say, I'm protecting myself. They're going to say things like, I'm protecting the reputation of the church. I'm protecting the bride of Christ. I'm protecting the body of Christ. I'm protecting the unity of the church. when in reality, they're protecting their own image, they're protecting their own brand, they're protecting what they look like. So when you have that protectionism, I want to protect the way I'm perceived, I want to protect my brand, and you add it to there are other people holding me accountable going, hey, this is something that's important for you to deal with, regardless of how it affects your brand. When those two things come together, we tend to get, he says moral failure, but I'm going to say this. I think it's bigger than moral failure. I think moral failure is where it starts, but moral failure unchecked. And again, if he's talking about you don't have accountability, moral failure is where it starts. Moral failure grows into a greater scandal, greater sin that goes way beyond moral failure. And eventually it grows into spiritual abuse. And then sometimes it even grows into illegal actions. I think about in James when it talks about each one of us is enticed by our own desires and we're led away by our own desires to sin. But it says sin, when it's full grown, leads to death. And I think that's a lot of what Lance is talking about here. When we have a lack of accountability and an over focus on our image, that lack of accountability is going to lead to sin that becomes moral failure, that becomes abuse of different kinds, usually starting with spiritual abuse. And then it can even become illegal and criminal activity if it's unchecked. The longer we go without accountability in a church or ministry environment, the bigger that the sin is going to grow, right? And he says, as the Roy's report consistently uncovered, okay, from the unchecked authoritarianism of James MacDonald to the enabling silence around former Newsboys frontman Michael Tait, who we're going to talk about here in just a second, the real scandal isn't just personal sin. He says the real scandal is a pattern of church and ministry leaders who knew and did nothing. Now, I think this is super important as well, because this isn't just about pushing the Roy's report, but the more articles and investigations the Roy's report does, the more they're seeing a pattern. The more that we look into church abuse scandals, the more that we are seeing a pattern. And if you haven't looked at it, guys, if you haven't actually been got a chance to look at it, we got the Safe Church Pledge right here. But if you go to SII's homepage, you go to research and you click research projects, you will see a research project that we did at the beginning of this year called the Building Safer Churches report. And you can actually pull up that white paper and read it. And what is this white paper about? It's an entire research study we did on 100 churches that have faced recent scandal. And the reason we did that study is because there is a repeatable pattern to churches that go through scandal. And you will see there is a ton of data there. We didn't just do this research study, but we actually had an AI large language model that repeated the study with the same parameters, just using some different churches, and it got very consistent results. So what I'm saying here is whether it's us, whether it's AI replicating the study, or whether it's just the Roy's report saying, hey, we've done all of these stories with different journalists, what we're all saying is we see a pattern. There is a pattern that's leading to this spiritual abuse. Now, that's the bad news, that there is a pattern. The good news is, once we know what the pattern is, we can do work to break the pattern. And one of the best things that we can do to break the pattern is introduce accountability into it. Because again, when we look at the Safe Church Pledge, and go ahead and pull this up for you guys, in the Safe Church Pledge, we basically break things into three categories. We said the Safe Church Pledge is churches pledging to do the very things that were absent in this pattern of 100 churches that went through recent scandal, okay? And here's what those churches did not have in common. They weren't transparent. They weren't accountable. There weren't good accountability systems, which is mainly what we're talking about today. And they didn't have protective systems to protect people if someone was just able to evade the systems for a while. Someone had sin and it was hidden. When that was found out, are there systems to protect the people who would talk about that, okay? Those are the things that we saw. There was a pattern of those things missing in the churches that have faced scandal. So the Safe Church Pledge is saying we're going to do the things that these unsafe, scandalous churches that had cover-ups, we're going to do the things that they didn't. And if those things had been in place, the majority of those scandals would have never happened. And the ones that would have still happened would have been caught early. A lot less damage would have been done to people. So they talk about that pattern. And they said in Tait's case, Michael Tait, former lead singer of the Newsboys, DC Talk, all of that. In Tait's case, Despite clear evidence of grooming and predatory behavior, along with other vices, and there was a lot around him. Okay, they've done a ton of articles about this. The Guardian's done articles about this. There's a ton of information out there. It is rough, but we're not going to talk about it on the podcast because most of it is not stuff that I feel comfortable even saying on this platform. Really bad stuff, guys. But there was evidence of his behavior. There was evidence of there being a lot of sin, even if people didn't see that behavior. But those around him, and this is wildly important, those around him reportedly chose protection over confrontation. They chose protection over confrontation. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today. Before we get into the rest of this article, I want to talk about Michael Tait and how this got so far out of hand. Because when you think about the Michael Tait situation, again, it brings up this really big, important idea. Sin grows where accountability is absent. And anytime you see a church scandal, anytime, you're also going to find a breakdown in accountability within that church. And all too often, you're going to find not just a breakdown in accountability, you're going to find a complete lack of real accountability in that church. But here's the problem. The longer accountability is absent in a church, the worse the sin is going to grow and the worse the damage to real people who Jesus loves and died for will be. Because every day there's not accountability, and every day that people get by with these things and get by with this sin and are able to cover it up, it grows like a cancer. It spreads like a yeast. And the scripture talks about this. The Bible says a little bit of yeast leavens the whole batch of dough. And that's what this sin does. But I want us to think about Michael Tait specifically, because in Michael Tait's situation, it was Tait's bravado and his ego that grew every time he got away with sin and abuse. Every time he did something and got away with it, his bravado increased. And guys, this happens with church leaders as well. The more a church or ministry leader gets away with and the less accountability they have, the more brave they're going to get with their sin. And what that usually means is the more brave they get with their sin, the worse their sin becomes because they feel untouchable. So I want us to look at this article real quick, another article that was posted in late July by the Roy's Report. But 2 additional men came forward with allegations against Michael Tait. And these were people who were close to Michael Tait. As you can see, there's pictures here on this front image. There's pictures all throughout this article. These were people who were close with him, who called him a brother. It's even got a warning up front in the article, guys, because this is tough stuff. This describes SA, and it could be very triggering for people who have been through that. Now, I don't want to go through a whole lot of this, but I want to get to one thing that I think is very, very important here. Okay, so you got one of the guys who's talking, and he says, "I was at the height of my career. I was Grammy nominated. I won a Dove, and I couldn't really enjoy it because of these things that were going on." But what he was in a really big band, okay? And he says this. He says, Michael Tait had the power to open doors for us in ministries. That's the first thing. This is very important. All of this stuff happened. It gets really out of hand. And you may say, why did it get so far out of hand? Well, it usually gets out of hand when you have a lack of accountability. But remember, we talked about that image piece a minute ago. You usually also have a leader who has power. They have power and authority over people. So I may have power and authority over your job, over your finances, over your future in an industry like this. But you usually will have a leader that has power and authority over people, and they don't say things because they're terrified of how much worse it could get, what they could lose if they say something. So they're already experiencing sin. They're already experiencing different forms of abuse. But man, if I say something, I may get no justice. I may lose my job. I may lose everything. And if you've never been in that situation, it's impossible to think straight when it's going on. People don't know how to think. They are traumatized. They're having trauma responses, and they're just trying to survive. And this guy says, hey, when stuff started going wrong, I just kind of went with it because he could open doors for me in the industry. He could close doors for me in the industry. He could kill my career, but I never knew what it would cost me. And later, he found out what it would cost him. But here's what I really want to focus on. Because again, when accountability is absent, sin grows. And the longer accountability is absent, the more sin grows like a cancer in the church. And the more that sin grows, the more bravado, the more ego, the more pride gets involved in it. And because these guys think they can get away with anything, they do more, they do worse things. And that's exactly what happened, I believe, here with Michael Tait. It says, as Tait's success grew, okay, during the rise of DC Talk, so did his bravado. For a while, Crawford told TRR that he tried to protect Tait from public scrutiny and cautioned him from acting out. So he starts doing more and more kind of wild things, more and more sinful things, more and more things that could damage his reputation if he was caught. But the more success he had, the more famous he was, the more people listened to his Christian music, the more his bravado grew because he felt safe. He felt like he could do whatever he wanted and no one was going to come against him. And you see that in this next part. It says in 1995, Tait drove through the grounds of his alma mater, Liberty University, and was pulled over by campus security for speeding. Now, it's a small thing. He's speeding, but there's accountability for speeding. You've been pulled over at this Christian university for speeding. You should get that ticket. Yet, even then, Tait wasn't held responsible for his behavior, and instead they laughed and they asked for autographs because we pulled him over. He's doing something wrong, but instead of holding him accountable for speeding on a Christian university, we say, oh, he's this famous singer. He's famous from DC Talk. Let's laugh. Let's chum it up. Let's get his autograph. If it was a little later on, they would have probably been asking for selfies, right? And because of that, let's go back to it. It said, as Tait's success grew, so did his bravado. So every time he got away with something, even something as simple as speeding, when the system didn't hold him accountable, he decided he could sin more and in even greater ways, and he would be okay, right? And here's kind of the kicker of this, right? And this is not just Michael Tait, guys. This is, for various reasons, I can't say those names right now, but I have sat in green rooms with pastors and heard very well-known people in Christian industries and churches say things like this. So this isn't just a Michael Tait situation, right? I even heard a pastor at one point say, hey, I'm pretty sure, because the way we've got our systems built here, I'm pretty sure that I could cheat on my wife and get away with it, and the elders still couldn't remove me, right? Now, again, that was toward the end of my time of ministry. It's part of what woke me up to these things, but I've heard pastors say these things. So again, this isn't just Michael Tait, but it says after the campus security left, Michael turned to me and calm as ever said, I can do anything and not get in trouble. I can do anything and not get in trouble. Why? Because the more success he had, the more that their accountability wasn't there, the more that he felt like he could do. And that's what happens to a whole lot of church leaders. Guys, the same thing happens to church leaders when we overlook sin, okay? Overlooking sin with church leaders specifically, it's not grace. Overlooking sin is not forgiveness. And overlooking sin with church leaders is definitely not protecting the church. When we overlook sin, it's actually the epitome of unkindness. And it's unkind because it hurts everybody involved. Those at campus security overlooking this with Michael Tait, it didn't just potentially hurt someone that he may hit. It hurt him because he thought he could get away with more. And then what happened? It hurt all of his future victims. It hurt all of the people that he would abuse and he would assault down the road. And this thing has went on. That was 1995. It's went on for decades. Why did it go on? Because all throughout the process, there was a lack of accountability. People would find out things. People would cover things up. They would say, well, we can't prove it. No one would try to hold him accountable. So overlooking sin is literally the epitome of unkindness because it hurts every single person involved. And the longer we go without checking sin, the longer we go without accountability, the worse the damage is going to be. The reality is that overlooking sin, it doesn't protect the church. It makes you complicit in the sin that you chose to overlook, right? And that makes people mad sometimes when I say it, but it's the reality. You chose to overlook a sin, and by choosing to overlook that sin, you hurt other people and became complicit in the sin, because accountability is the one thing that stops sin in its tracks. Because even if the person's not willing to repent, even if the leader's not willing to repent or stop their actions, when you hold them accountable in the light, at least other people know it and can be careful and can distance themselves, can mark and avoid, and can say, Okay, well, now we know that we can protect ourselves. When we're silent, we take that away from people. And I really do believe this. I really believe that the most loving thing that we can do as the church, the most loving thing that we can do as the church is to start calling our own fouls, even when it makes us look bad, even when it makes us uncomfortable. Because when we call a foul early, when we call sin what it is and we say, this is wrong and this shouldn't happen early, it's usually smaller sin with a smaller impact that is going to hurt less people. And the earlier we call it out, the greater chance there is that we stop it, the greater chance there is that we protect people down the road. I want you to think about Brady Boyd. We're going to talk about him later in the live stream today. But Brady Boyd, the pastor of New Life Church in Colorado, he was at Gateway before that. He was allowed to be the senior pastor of this megachurch for decades. He was allowed to be there for way longer than he should have because the elders and the executives didn't deal with it when they found out before he even became the pastor. When he was interviewing, they found out that he knew about Robert Morris's sin. They found out that he S8 a 12-year-old and that Brady knew it was a 12-year-old. And that's what we have from New Life says they've got emails and documents that show that he was involved with this. Robert Morris gave court disclosures that show that he's involved with this. So why was he the pastor of this church for so long and more people were getting hurt? Well, people were getting hurt. The sin was allowed to grow. The same thing with Robert Morris because the people who knew about it didn't do anything. And that wasn't loving. That wasn't protecting the church. That was unkind. And it made all of them complicit in the sin. And now that New Life has found out he's complicit in the sin, they removed Brady and he lost all of that he worked for. The question is, how many people were hurt that didn't have to get hurt because he stayed in ministry? The most loving thing we can do as the church, and the most loving thing they could have done then was to say, we're removing you from ministry. We're not hiring you. We're recommending that Gateway shouldn't hire you because you knew about this thing. And because you didn't hold someone accountable when you knew, you became complicit. And guys, would that have made the church look bad? Yeah. Would that have hurt Brady in the moment? Would that have hurt Robert Morris and Gateway in the moment? Yes. Would it have caused less of a black eye and less reputational damage to the church if they dealt with it then than waiting? 100%. Would it have protected people and done less damage to Cindy Clemishier if it had been dealt with earlier and they could have helped her heal? They could have walked through, people could have come around her. She could have had freedom from this. It would have helped everybody involved. So even when it makes us look bad, it's important that the church learns to call our own fouls. Okay. It's very, very important that we learn how to do that. And again, one of the absolute kindest things that we can do as the church body is to hold church leaders accountable, to hold each other accountable, and to allow other people to hold us accountable because none of us are beyond heinous sin without accountability. We need other people, other brothers and sisters in Christ to help us be the best version of ourselves and to correct us when we get off. Just like it was a gift when Paul corrected Peter, it's a gift when we correct one another and when we allow others to correct us. So it starts with us. Who's holding you accountable? Who in your life will you let hold you accountable? Who in your life will you let check you, even if it's uncomfortable and it makes you mad? But also think about your church. Who's holding your pastors accountable? Who's holding that lead pastor accountable? And if you don't know the answer to that, and you don't know how you as a church member could hold them accountable, if you see something wrong, then you got to ask those questions. If you can't find answers to those questions, then I would encourage you to leave that church because that church is a scandal that's waiting to happen. But let's go ahead and let's get back to this article by Lance Ford. He says, again, in Tait's case, despite clear evidence, the people around him reportedly chose protection over confrontation. And he says, this isn't just a crisis of character. It's a crisis of leadership culture, because a part of a good leadership culture is that we are going to have accountability. And after wave upon wave of church scandals, moral failures, abuse cover-ups, financial impropriety, he says you would think we would have learned by now. But the reality is these things keep happening. We're not adjusting accountability. We're treating them like isolated incidences when the truth is that the glue that's holding all this together is a pattern of a lack of accountability, transparency, and protective systems. And accountability is kind of the glue that holds those two things together. But he says, yet when these implosions happen, churches and Christian organizations often respond with, well, we had accountability in place. Like, I guess our systems didn't work, but we had systems in place. Think about if you haven't watched that series where we looked into ARC, you can look into it. These churches would say, well, we had elders and we had trustees and we had overseers. We don't know how this happened. But when you look at their bylaws, you realize that the pastor picked the elders and the pastor picked the trustees and the pastor was the chairman of the board. And the only people that could hold the pastor accountable was the overseers that he handpicked as well. And the only way the overseers could hold him accountable is if the majority of the trustees and the elders voted to hold that pastor accountable, who again picked them. And then the only thing that happened is the overseers would come in, and then 2 or 3 people that pastor handpicked would have to investigate their friend. Now, you have churches who, because we don't know that and we don't see their bylaws, you have a scandal happen, and these churches are going, but we had accountability. The reality is, when you look at their bylaws, you realize they didn't have accountability at all. It looked like accountability. And that's what he says. This is the problem, because what they call accountability usually isn't, at least not in any meaningful or biblical way. So you can have accountability on paper, but all it takes is just pulling back the curtain just a little bit, and you see those systems didn't really have accountability. He says we've settled for structures that look like accountability on paper, but function more like liability shields or PR strategies. And in some of these churches, if you could see their bylaws, you would see that part of the role of the overseers is to help them in PR crisis type situations. He says elders often answer to the lead pastor rather than each other. Boards are filled with friends or business partners. And I would say this, boards are often also filled with staff members. So the very staff members on the board who would be holding that pastor accountable, he's the one who signs their checks, and he could just fire them if they're saying things that he doesn't like. He says denominational systems often don't step in enough. He says it's not that accountability isn't happening, it's that it isn't working. Okay. Now, I would say in some of these situations, accountability is not happening at all, and they're just trying to make us think they've got accountability afterwards. In other places, we've got a little bit of accountability, but it's not enough. Because again, if you go back and you listen to the investigation part, the 2-part investigation we did into ARC, you'll hear an ARC regional coordinator in charge of planting churches that says, in this system, too often the pastor becomes a king. That's a quote. He names it on a recording. The pastor becomes a king. So yes, there may be a little bit of accountability, but at the end of the day, you can't hold a king accountable. You can try, but that's why we don't have kings in this country. It's why we have checks and balances, and why we're supposed to have a separation of powers, because that's the only way that we can hold people accountable. He talks about the posture before the policy. He says everything starts with a posture of humility and mutual submission and personal integrity. If that's not in place, no bylaws or oversight committees will make a difference. And he quotes Mitch Little, who's a former Texas state representative and attorney. He says, if your leadership lacks the requisite character and experience, no manual will help you. And if you have the appropriate level of character and experience, no manual is necessary. Okay. And what I want to do, I want to talk about this last paragraph, and then I'm going to show you some things in the Safe Church Pledge as we go, because I agree wholeheartedly with Lance. In the Safe Church Pledge, we go a little farther than Lance does in some places. He talks about some things that we don't talk about in others, and I think this is a very good conversation. But he says the goal of accountability isn't to keep leaders from falling. It's to help them walk in the light freely and consistently. It's not just about catching sin. It's about cultivating truthfulness, learning to speak truth in love, for we are members of one another. So I want to go ahead. I want to go to the Safe Church Pledge. Again, it's in these 3 big categories. We ask churches to pursue being a safe church. How? By being transparent, by being accountable, and by having protective systems. Okay. And when he's talking about this, when he's talking about everything starts with a posture of humility and mutual submission, well, that's part of what we're asking for with transparency. Here's some of the things we ask for with transparency that you're going to see. And you can look at these in much more detail on your own, spiritualabuse.institute. Just click on the front page. take the Safe Church Pledge, and it'll bring you here. We ask for financial transparency, for the church to give transparent financial reports on an annual basis to their congregation, if not to the public. We ask them to publicly disclose to their congregation and others a conflict of interest policy. Okay. And with their conflict of interest policy, disclose any potential conflicts of interest, like family members and stuff like that on the board, key employees. We ask them to be transparent and not do NDAs and non-competes. And the best practice is that they actually release people from any previous NDAs and non-competes. We ask them to disclose their affiliations and their partnerships. So if you're a part of ARC, say you're a part of ARC. If you're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, say you're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. Don't hide those things. And then we ask them to have a publicly disclosed nepotism protection policy. Now, you may be saying, Jeff, why are all those important? Well, to me, they're important because one, they show a posture of humility. Okay. They're saying before you ask, okay, it's not just like when you ask, we'll tell you the truth. Before you ask, we're going to be see-through. That's what transparent means. We're going to be see-through and we're going to proactively show you things that you would need to know. We're going to proactively show you the things that we're doing to make sure that we are protected, because we want to be humble before you. And why would a church do this? Why would church leaders do this? Because they know they're capable of sin. That's why we ask churches to do this, because you know you're capable of sin. Now, here's the problem. A lot of the churches that I reach out to about the Safe Church Pledge, here's one of the most common things I hear. I have a pastor that says, Jeff, that's great. This stuff is great. Every church should do this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we're getting somewhere. And they'll say, I think every church should be safe too. Like, it breaks my heart the churches aren't safe. Okay, yeah, we're in agreement. So let's go ahead and take the next steps. And then they'll say this, but I just don't see why our church would need it, because like, we're already a safe church. We don't have any of these things. This isn't going to happen here, right? And as soon as I hear that, I know that church is not ready to sign the Safe Church Pledge. I know that conversation is about to end because they don't have a posture of humility that says we're capable of sin. They say, oh, this is good stuff for other people because other people, other churches, that church down the street, that other denomination, they're capable of sin. But when you ask them about them, they say, well, I just don't see why we would need it here. We're not capable of that sin. This place is safe. We could never be an abusive church. Now, here's the thing, though. Every church that hits the news, if you ask the majority of the people of that church the day before they hit the news, they'd go, no, we're a safe church. No abuse could happen here. That couldn't happen here. And then they're always surprised when it happened. A posture of humility says we're going to be transparent proactively because we know no matter how much we love God, no matter how much we trust ourselves, we're all capable of sin without transparency and accountability. Then the second thing he talks about, though, Lance says it's a posture of humility and mutual submission. Well, what are these things? What are proactively taking these steps of transparency? Well, a pastor and elders saying we're going to be financially transparent. We're going to give you as much information as a secular nonprofit has to or more. They're mutually submitting to the congregation. And they're saying, you can handle this. This is your church. This is your money, your donation. So we're going to let you know where those things are going. We're going to let you ask questions. We're going to submit to you proactively. The conflict of interest policy and the disclosures of any potential conflicts. Hey, we're just going to tell you, we're trying to stay above reproach, but we're mutually submitting to you because you may see something that we're not. We're also submitting to you because we want you to know these are the standards we said we'd live by. So if we're not, feel free to call us out. NDAs and non-competes. By telling your congregation, hey, we're not going to do this publicly, you're mutually submitting to them and saying, hey, if we ever slide one in front of you, staff member, you know we've already told everybody that we're not doing that, so that you can stand up and you can say, no, I'm not going to sign this. We're disclosing our partnerships and affiliations as mutual submission. We want you to know what your church is a part of. And if you have concerns or questions, we want you to be able to ask about that. We're not hiding anything. And then the same thing with a nepotism protection policy. We're telling you this is what we're doing to create a safe place from nepotism. And we're disclosing any potentially nepotistic looking relationships on staff. So you may not know that these two people are related, but out of mutual submission and transparency, we are going to tell you that they are related. Do you see how this works? It takes a posture of humility to do these things, and it takes that mutual submission. Now, even if you don't have personal integrity, this allows for corporate integrity. My church has publicly committed to do these things. So if they stop giving us financial disclosures, we're going to help bring them back to integrity and wholeness by saying, no, we expect that because that's how we mutually submit to one another. The same thing if they're not doing the things they said they would do. So it's true that if those things are not in place, no bylaws or oversight committees will make a difference. And that's why when you come over here, guys, if you look, that's why we start with transparency on the safe church commitments. Because if you're transparent, then the accountability can work. If you're not transparent, accountability systems are going to have a hard time working because you're already hiding things. So that's where we talk about governance structure and bylaws. And we'll get into that stuff here in a minute. But we talk about that second. Why? Because I agree with Lance. If that posture of humility and mutual submission that's required for transparency, if it's not in place, the bylaws and the governance, the committees, they're not going to make a difference. All right. He says you can't outsource accountability to a structure. It requires people committed to following Jesus together. The New Testament doesn't give us corporate blueprints. It gives us pictures of communities where no one walks alone. The greatest among them is a servant. And he says, if our accountability systems aren't relational at the core, they won't work. And we're going to get into why most accountability systems fail here in a minute. But that's a whole nother reason, guys, when you may say, hey, Jeff, what's kind of the biggest win out of the Safe Church Pledge? Why do you guys push that all the time? And here's the reason why. It's because it makes accountability a church thing, a community thing, a relational thing. It actually puts the power to hold a church accountable not in our hands as SAI. We're kind of a facilitator of this, but it doesn't put it in the leadership's hands either. It puts it in your hands. The leadership makes commitments. They are transparent. They submit to the church. And then if you are a part of a church or you're in a community and a church has said, we commit to these things, and all of a sudden they're not doing it, let's use the example of the financial disclosures. You could contact us and say, hey, they're not doing what they said they would do. And we're supposed to have a whistleblower protection policy, but if they're not giving the financial disclosures, I'm a little worried that if I go, they may not protect me. They said they would do this. They told you all that. Can you hold them accountable? Well, then we pick up the phone and we say, hey, we don't see your financial disclosure. Maybe that's just an oversight. Let's get that taken care of in the next 90 days. And if they do, great. You have been able to help hold them accountable, and we have just assisted you in that. But the reality is that you as a church member were able to hold them accountable, and anyone can do that. Anyone in these churches would be able to do that. Now, if they don't do something, though, you're not alone. We're with you, and we're saying, hey, you didn't get this taken care of. You got one more week. If you don't get this taken care of, we're going to put you on a lapse list. And that publicly available list, we're going to let people know why you're lapsed. You stopped giving financial disclosures. And we can no longer call you a safe church at this moment because you're not meeting the things that you committed to. It's all done in good faith. But guys, it allows us to support you. It allows your pastors to be upfront, your leaders, your elders to be upfront. This is what we've committed to. And then it puts the power back in the congregation's hands that every member of the global church can say we can hold each other accountable. We can hold our churches and our pastors and our leaders accountable because they told us what they committed to. And because they've committed to that, if we see it not happening, we can hold them accountable. And we've got systems in place to protect us and people to walk through this with us so we don't feel like we're alone. Okay. Now he goes into next why do most accountability systems fail, and then he's going to give kind of like I think it's 5 things that need to be in a good accountability system in a church. Because again, if these things are in place, if we can move from no or limited to accountability to good accountability, that's the best antidote to these church scandals and these moral failures and spiritual abuse and SA and guys, even the criminal stuff that we are seeing. We could stop it with accountability. But he says, here's why most accountability systems are going to fail. Number one, they're built to protect the leader, not the mission. The job of the board is to protect that organization. And again, we talked about this with the ARC investigation. That is the governance structure that they recommend. That governance structure in its bylaws is really building something where the board, the trustees, and the overseers are all there to protect the pastor, not the people of the church, not the mission of the church. So one of the things that we do to address that is under accountability, we ask safe churches to commit to, 1, publicly disclose your governance structure. Everybody in your church should know what your governance structure is. So Again, let's say an ARC church that had that governance structure said, hey, we want to be a safe church. Okay, well, then you're going to have to actually tell people what your governance structure is, like how it actually works. Okay, so that's one thing that we do, because you give it to the congregants and they can say, it doesn't look like anybody's really holding the pastor accountable here. Let's make a change. Okay, and the reality is, a church that has a governance structure like that, they're not going to share it publicly. A church that believes they really are being held accountable, they're going to share that publicly, and they're probably going to do it proudly, because, hey, why would we not? We got a great governance structure. The second thing we do, though, is we look at the governing body, and we want you to list not just what our structure is, who are the actual people, who are the board of directors, not advisors, but the board of directors. Who are the people legally voting? Who are the trustees? Who are the members of this church's governing body, and how could we contact them if we had a question? And then the other thing that we do is we ask them to be independent. That at least 2/3 of all voting members are independent, which means they're not an employee. They don't take a paycheck. They're not financially getting any benefit from the church. And if you look at the best practice, we actually tell them the best practice is that 90% of your voting members are independent. Okay, so maybe everybody on a 10-person board, that'd be everybody but the pastor, if the pastor wanted to have a seat on the board. And then at least 25% of the voting members, at least 1/4, they're from outside. They don't attend the church regularly. Why? Because you need a governance structure that is built to protect the mission and the people, not the leader. Now, the second thing he says is they rely on titles instead of competency and character. And if you go back and you look at the bylaws that are a part of the governance structure that ARC recommends, for instance, you're going to see that one of the titles it gives is that the pastor is both the senior pastor and the CEO and president of the corporation. And it talks in depth about those dual roles and why they're important and why that title is important. Well, the CEO basically controls everything and doesn't even answer to the board, answers to the overseer. So again, they rely on those titles instead of competency and character. He says they run top down, not side by side. It's top down. The pastor chooses the overseers. The pastor chooses the trustees. The pastor either chooses the elders or has the right to veto any elder that he doesn't want and can remove people at any time that he doesn't want. That's top down. And in a lot of different governance structures, not just that one with ARC, there's a lot of different church governance structures where it's top down. What we're asking for is an actual governing body you tell your church about that's independent, a majority independent, or at least a good section of them is independent, right? That you're telling everybody who these people are so that you can talk to them. And we're sharing our bylaws. The governing bylaws are available for the church, right? We actually, the best practice is to make them publicly available. Why? Because when we make our bylaws publicly available and we tell people who these leaders are and how to contact them, and we tell them what our governance structure is and who could remove the pastor if there's an issue, and they know that the church governance is independent, then one, it's more likely to be a side-by-side governance, but also now your congregation's involved. And we're walking side by side with our pastor. We're walking side by side with our leaders because we know what's expected. And if you're not doing what the bylaws say, we can hold you accountable to that. And then if you still refuse to do what the bylaws say, we can take legal action, because as a corporate entity, if your church is a 501c3 corporate entity, they have to do what those bylaws say, which is why it's so important that those bylaws are made available to the congregation, because now it's side-by-side leadership, not only with a board of directors or a board of elders, not only with overseers, those sort of things, but it's side-by-side because the congregation plays a role. Now, your church does not have to have congregational leadership where the congregation votes on everything, okay? There's a lot of reasons why that governance structure doesn't work in a lot of churches, okay? That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that everybody who is a member of your church, the church body has a role to play in side-by-side governance. It's not the pastor over everybody else. It's not top down. It's side by side. We're gathering together. We submit to you, pastors and leaders in leadership, but you also mutually submit to us, because the New Testament teaches mutual submission. The fourth reason that Lance says accountability structures fail in churches is they lack an outside perspective. Closed systems rarely see their own blind spots. We need external voices to stay honest and healthy. And guys, this is what happens a lot of times when spiritual abuse allegations are brought. Well, now it's everybody inside it's friends of the pastor. We don't want to believe bad things about our pastor. We don't want to believe bad things about our church. We want to believe that this is not true. And if you've only got inside voices, whether you mean to or not, you're biased to protect that church. You're biased to protect that pastor who you know, because if they're not who I thought they were, and I can't trust them, then what else was I wrong about? That causes a lot of cognitive dissonance. If there's outside voices in the governance structure, well, hey, we'd love for this pastor to be a good person, but guys, if y'all act this way, like people are going to think you're just trying to cover this up, right? An outside voice a lot of times is going to be very helpful. So let's go back to the Safe Church Pledge. One of the things that we do with the independent governance and the governing body, okay, is we ask that with the best practice, we ask that at least 25% of the voting members don't attend the church regularly. A quarter of the board are people outside, but we ask that they're outside, but they're local. They live in the same city as the church or within 100 miles of the church location. So instead of saying, oh, we got overseers who were spread all the way across the country and they're like absentee landlords who don't understand our culture and can't come see what's happening at the church, we don't want that. But we also don't want everybody who's involved in governing a church to be inside it, because you want the majority of the people who are governing that church to be a part of that church, right? But you want some outside trusted voices that can say, hey guys, this isn't going to be right. This is what you got to do for the body of Christ. Some people who are completely independent and not tied to this and are close enough to see what's going on. That rarely happens. That fixes that lack of outside perspective. And the last thing he says is they act too late. Accountability that only kicks in after crisis is reactionary. True accountability is proactive. And that brings me to really the last part of the Safe Church Pledge and why we do this. It's what we call protective systems. But these are proactive things, just like transparency is proactive. These are proactive things because we know that church accountability is proactive. If you wait to try to do the right thing when allegations of a scandal have already come and you're under pressure, you're not going to react the right way. The best thing to do is to decide in advance, here are the proactive things, the proactive decisions we're going to make so that we protect people and we fight for the truth. So one of those protective systems we ask churches to do is to have a trauma-informed staff. That all of your staff, and we actually ask the best practices that your volunteers also regularly go through trauma-informed training from a trauma-informed professional, okay? We can do that for churches, but a lot of churches, man, they usually have a therapist or trauma-informed professionals in their church or that they're connected to or in their community. But when a church staff and volunteers are trauma-informed, we're less likely, we're being proactive that if someone brings something to us, we don't want to re-traumatize them by acting poorly. Another proactive step, because again, Lance said accountability is proactive, not reactive. We ask churches to create a whistleblower and reporting policy. How can people blow the whistle and report sin or concerns if they see it in a way that protects them? Okay. And bonus points, best practice is that the policy is made publicly available on the church's website. So if a scandal happens, everybody knows what they're doing to protect that person. Everybody in the church knows this is how I report, and these are the things we committed to do proactively to keep that person safe, because that person should not be mistreated because they reported a concern, okay? It's deciding in advance what kinds of things need an independent investigation, how is that going to be triggered, and who are our first three calls? Who are we going to ask to do this independent investigation? It's saying we're not going to wait to find out that a church leader is unhealthy and then say, well, we just want to show them grace and help them get healthy. No, it says we're going to have a staff care plan to make sure that our staff and our pastors can go to therapy, can get help, can be healthy. And we're going to help take care of that as a church because we want to be proactive to make sure that they are emotionally and spiritually healthy and not just wait until something happens, right? And then that last thing, that very, very proactive thing, most churches are supposed to have a child protection policy. Most of them probably do. Some of them, nobody knows what it is. So the first thing we do is we ask them to disclose those protection policies. But we ask churches to be proactive and not just stop at child protection policies. We 100% need to protect every child and every minor who walks through that church. But what I know from a long time in youth ministry is, and this was a big concern of mine before I left youth ministry, because I failed at this for years. And when I was getting ready to leave youth ministry, it was one of the drums I was beating of, hey guys, we got to create better policies for our teenagers, because we have more robust policies for children, but do we have teen protection policies that really keep up in the real world? And that's not to say we didn't have protection. We did. I just thought they needed to go much further, right? So a lot of churches, though, they don't have teen protection policies. So we ask churches to have child protection policies, teen protection policies, and adult protection policies. And you may say, Jeff, why do we need adult protection policies? Well, an adult protection policy is where a church decides what it believes and about and how it's going to handle adult clergy SA. Okay, that it's not just going to say if a pastor has an affair with a church member that that's an affair. They're deciding in advance, is that an affair, or are we going to say that's adult clergy SA, and how are we going to handle it? And they're going to let their church know where they stand on that. So if that makes sense, everything in, and this is why I love this article so much, because it was a reminder. This is why we put out the Safe Church Pledge. It's why we're working to try to get churches to step into this starting this fall, starting really this month. The reason why we're doing this, we're going from talking about it to trying to get churches to join it, is because we know most accountability systems fail because of these things. And we've seen the data, we've seen the patterns. Most churches involved in scandal, it happened because their accountability systems failed because these things weren't in place. So we're asking them, why not be proactive to put the very things in place that would have stopped these scandals to begin with? And then he finishes with the 5 pillars of healthy accountability. I want to talk about those for just a minute, and then I want to see what you think. Let us know in the comments, let us know in the chat what you think about all this. Are these the right pillars? Is he missing a pillar? Are we talking about something that's not as helpful as we think? Let us know. Let's start a conversation, because again, guys, this isn't just a video to talk. This isn't just a video about my ideas or Lance's ideas. The biggest part of this video is reminding you that we all have a voice and we all have a role to play in church accountability. And if greater accountability, real accountability systems, is the best way for us to stop scandal, if accountability is the one thing that stops sin from growing in its tracks, then we all need to be involving ourselves and joining this discussion about accountability. But here's what Lance says. He says, 5 pillars of healthy accountability. If we want real change, we need to build accountability from the inside out. Here are 5 essentials. He says it's shared leadership, not hero leadership. Accountability works when leadership isn't concentrated in one person. The moment a church revolves around a single charismatic figure, accountability is already compromised. And then he says at the bottom, Jesus didn't appoint a CEO, he formed a circle. And I don't know about you, but I 100% agree. It's one of the reasons why I'm so concerned with that common model of governance in ARC. It's something I've noticed in almost every scandal that we have covered. You have leadership that is not shared, or maybe it's shared a little bit on paper, but the reality is the systems are built around one person. They're built around a charismatic leader who is bringing in money to the church. People want to protect them. And just like that person, just like that ARC regional coordinator said, if we're not careful, these pastors actually become kings. And when he says that Jesus didn't appoint a CEO, he formed a circle. Again, for some people, they're going to say that sounds like hyperbole. These pastors are not CEOs. But when we looked at those bylaws, the recommended bylaws from an ARC lead team member about the governance structure that he literally said, the Association of Related Churches, we really push and promote this hybrid model. It's what we believe is best. The literal bylaws said you make your pastor a CEO. You make him the president of the corporation. And that's one of the things that he said. You can change some things about these bylaws, but don't change that, because that's where the magic of this governance structure happens. When I don't know if he meant it this way or not, but what he describes is the magic of the governance structure is a lack of accountability. The magic of it is that you can move fast and you can do what you want because there's not people asking questions and holding the pastor accountable. The second thing he says that you absolutely need for a good accountability system is you need outside eyes, and those outside eyes need to have inside access. So you need to have people who are outside the church. What he means by inside access, though, is that they can actually get documents when they need them. They can get information. They can come in and talk to staff. So that minimum of 25% for a best practice that are on your board, that are from the outside, they should be able to walk into the church, walk into any room and get information. Hey, can I get financial information? Hey, can I sit down with this staff member and talk to them? They need to have access. And a lot of times what you'll have is you'll have churches that say we got outside overseers, but two things are happening. One, they live 500, 1,000, 2,000 miles away. So they don't have a lot of access. Two, when they come in, the only inside access we give them is we show them what we want to show them and we let them preach. Okay, so the church feels like they know them, but they can't talk to our staff without us. They can't ask questions without us. They can't just call and ask somebody on staff for a document because some of the staff don't even know who our elders are. And there have been a lot of churches where they said, "Hey, we were told our overseers is who holds the pastor accountable, but we couldn't get them to tell us who the overseers were. They never published it, so we could not even reach out to them." Right? I've actually heard from a church that said our bylaws said that the elders had to reach out to the overseers to trigger an investigation. And our elder board literally couldn't figure out who the overseers were. They had never met them. So we couldn't trigger an investigation or even try, even though we wanted to, because we didn't know who these overseers were. So you need outside eyes, but they need to be close enough to have inside access, and we need to trust them enough to give them inside access. And he gives some different people that could be partnering churches, spiritual directors, peer mentors. It could be local licensed therapists in your community, accountability coaches. It could be independent investigators who are sitting on your board, all of those sort of things. But he says we got to create feedback loops that aren't just inside. I totally agree. The third thing that he says we have to have for a good accountability culture, it's a truth-telling culture. Okay. He says truthfulness can't be mandated. It must be practiced. Okay. A safe environment for questions, concerns, and even dissent. If your culture punishes dissent, you will never have genuine accountability. If your culture punishes dissent, you'll never have genuine accountability. And what's one of the most common things we hear when people have concerns about spiritual abuse is that when I ask questions, I'm told I'm being divisive. I'm told I have a bitter spirit. I'm told I just don't trust my pastors. I'm told I've got a Jezebel spirit. I'm letting the enemy in, all these sort of things. And I'm demonized for asking these questions. And people won't answer my questions. He says, in a safe environment, questions, concerns, even dissent is okay. And if you punish dissent, you won't have real accountability. So this truth-telling culture, the truth-telling culture is why we ask the churches to do all of these things, starting with transparency. Because a lot of churches will say, "Hey, Jeff, we get it. These are good things, but we don't have to do that lawfully. The law doesn't require that we do that. So why would we do something we don't have to do?" They'll say, "Hey, Jeff, I get these are good things, but the Bible doesn't require us to do this. So why would I do something that the Bible doesn't make me do and that the law doesn't make me do?" And my answer is always the same. The reason why you would do these things is because church leaders, and therefore the church by extension, are called to be above reproach. And how can we be above reproach if we are not transparent? And how can we be above reproach if businesses, corporations, and secular nonprofit organizations are all more transparent than we are? So the reason you do it is you're going to be above reproach. And why are you going to be above reproach? You're going to practice telling truth even when you don't have to. And you are going to build a truth-telling culture. How? By being transparent. We tell the truth about our finances, even if you haven't asked. We tell the truth about conflicts of interest and how we're going to handle those and potential conflicts we have on staff, even if you haven't asked. We tell the truth and say we're not going to do NDAs. Why? We're not going to do NDAs because we never want to stop someone from telling the truth. And we don't want to have the ability to change our minds and do that under pressure. So we're telling you publicly, we don't use NDAs. And if anybody ever gives you one from here, don't sign it and you tell everybody, because we never want to be a place that stops people from telling the truth, right? We're going to tell the truth about partnerships and affiliations, even if it means some people leave because they don't like those partnerships and affiliations. We're going to give people the ability to push back and maybe even leave and stop giving because we want to be honest about where we are. And if enough people are having a problem with this, then maybe we need to rethink these affiliations. And the same thing with nepotism that nobody wants to talk about because we don't want to tell people anything that might upset them. So when churches ask me, "Jeff, why would we do these things?" Well, because you want to be above reproach. And part of being above reproach is being honest and telling the truth even before you're asked. Transparency is see-through. Accountability is you can come to me And then I'm going to answer you, or even if I don't answer you, there are mechanisms for you to find out what you need. Transparency comes before accountability because transparency says, I want to create a culture and a habit where I tell you what you need to know before you have to ask. And if you ask, you've already got the information so that you can hold me accountable. You're not trying to hold me accountable by getting information. So truth telling culture is massively important. The last thing he says is congregational, or I think it's second to last thing he says, congregational visibility. Healthy accountability includes appropriate transparency within the congregation. Okay. That doesn't mean airing out every detail, every conflict, having a vote for everything. But what he says is you treat members as participants, not spectators. And how do you do that? See if you've noticed some of these things in the Safe Church Pledge. You do it through public financial reporting, clear avenues for raising concerns, right? Congregational affirmation of leaders, not just top down appointments, term limits, and rotating leadership roles. These first two are in the Safe Church Pledge. When we're talking to churches about their governance structure, okay, we don't require it in the Safe Church Pledge as it is today, but we encourage term limits and rotating leadership roles. But all of those things should be disclosed in the bylaws. So even if it's not what I would want or what someone else would want, you will know in your church, are they doing these things or not? And if not, can I talk to them about it? Because it's clearly in the bylaws. And it's the same thing about congregational affirmation of leaders. That stuff is in the bylaws. So if they're not doing it, we can hold them accountable and say, you got to do this differently. That's actually part of what happened at McLean Bible Church. Okay. With David Platt, part of the reason why they had those lawsuits and stuff against them was because they said, whoa, the bylaws say we choose elders this way. We don't think that you did that the correct way. The congregation has a vote, and that was part of what started the different accountability that was brought at McLean. Okay, so all of that is important. All of that is important. The congregation doesn't have to make every decision, but the congregation should play a role because the church is the body of Christ, and Scripture says that every part has a role. Every part is important, even the parts that we think aren't important. They're not only important; sometimes they're the most important. Everybody has a role to play. So if you're in a church and you don't have a role to play in that, you don't have any visibility over these accountability systems, then there is likely a concern about accountability. And then the last thing that he says that we have to have for a good accountability system is we need rhythms of reflection and repentance. Don't wait for a crisis to build accountability in. Bake it into your regular leadership life. Now, he talks about a lot of things here. You could have quality personal retreats, spiritual check-ins, annual leadership health audits with outside facilitators, or maybe even therapists, things like that. Peer huddles for mutual confession and encouragement. Post-decision debriefs. Did we do this well? And he says accountability is not a fire alarm. It's a smoke detector. It's telling you before the fire gets out of hand. I agree with all of that. One of the things I would say as well, though, this is why we ask churches to build those protective systems. So when you go back to the Safe Church Pledge, all these bottom things, the protective systems, trauma-informed staff, whistleblower and reporting policy, independent investigation policy, staff care, counseling for pastors, child, teen, and protection policies. The reason we have those, that entire bucket, is because we don't want churches to wait until a crisis happens to build accountability. Don't wait until someone has an allegation to try to figure out who they can report it to and how you can protect them. Decide when nothing's happening. Decide when things are good. Don't wait until your pastor's accused of sin, or a church leader's accused of sin, or an elder's accused of sin. Don't wait to decide when you should place them on leave and whether you should pay them or not. Already have a leave policy. Don't wait until something happens to decide if it needs an internal or an independent investigation. Decide up front what needs an independent investigation and let your church know all of these things. So I totally agree with Lance. Don't wait for a crisis to build accountability. Instead, safe churches are proactive. They decide in advance, how will we handle it if sin rears its ugly head? How will we handle it if we discover that abuse has happened and it's been hidden from us? How are we going to handle this to fight for truth? How are we going to handle this to protect everybody involved, both the person that is whistleblowing, the victims, the people alleging this, and how can we even protect the pastors and staff members and elders and leaders and volunteers if they're falsely accused? These kind of accountability systems, guys, they protect everybody. And it's why I tell pastors and church leaders when we're talking about Safe Church Pledge, they'll always ask, well, hey, what's the reason I should sign the Safe Church Pledge? And I start with, it's literally a win for everybody in the kingdom. The entire church gets better. It protects everybody when we step into these things. And then he finishes this article. And again, if you want to read the whole thing on your own, it's a great article. But he says at the end of the day, accountability isn't control, it's care. Most leaders confuse accountability with control. And they think if I have these accountability systems and I let my church hold me accountable, they're going to control me. Okay. And that's not what we're asking for at all, right? We're asking for care. They're going to care for me and I'm going to care for them. These accountability systems mean they can care for me and try to keep me from sin, but also care for me enough to restore me and bring me out of that if I'm in sin. And I'm caring for them by making sure that they are protected from my worst decisions, that they're protected from anybody on our staff or elders or volunteers that might hide things. Like we want everybody to be cared for. That's what accountability is really about. And then he finishes with a final word to leaders. If you're a pastor or leader reading this, let me say plainly, don't wait for a crisis. Build accountability now. Build it before the storm. And I think that is the greatest advice that you could give to church leaders. And it's why we built the Safe Church Pledge. Decide in advance what accountability looks like. Decide in advance how you're going to protect your church. Decide in advance how honest and transparent that you are going to be. And for those of you who are listening, because I know we've got some church staff and leaders listening, but I know that the majority of our audience, you're people who maybe you've been hurt by church, you know someone who's been hurt by church, you've experienced spiritual abuse, or you're just trying to make sure that your church is safe. These accountability mechanisms, everything that I've talked about in the Safe Church Pledge, everything that Lance talked about in this article, those are things that you should look for in your church. And if you can't find them or you don't know the answers to those questions, just ask. Again, if it's a safe and accountable church, they're going to have no problem with you asking. There's nothing in my church where I don't feel like I could ask my pastor about the finances. Okay, down to we've had conversations, me and him across the table, about his salary, right? About elders, about all kinds of things like that. There's nothing that I feel like I can't ask in my church. And I don't want to ever be a part of a church again where I can't ask those questions. Now, here's the crazy thing. So many times, like Lance said, church leaders think this is about control. I actually ask way less questions in the church I'm at now because I feel like they would answer all of my questions. I ask way more questions when I was in an environment where people didn't want to answer my questions. And I felt like they were hiding things from me. The more transparent you are as a church, the more trust that you're going to build with your congregation. And it's not blind trust just because you're the man of God, it's earned trust because you have been transparent with them. You have been honest when you didn't have to. You've been proactive and you offered mutual submission and accountability. So again, I think this stuff happens when it happens in church is a good thing. And I think it helps every single person in the church. And when it comes down to it, guys, when it comes down to it, we started this whole conversation about accountability and we said spiritual abuse, cover ups, all this scandal in the church. Why does it keep happening? We said it happens because accountability is absent. So the best way that we can stop church scandals, the best way that we can protect people and stop spiritual abuse, the best way that we can restore the trust of the world around us in the church is that instead of having absent accountability, we need to prize accountability and everybody plays a role in that. So I want you, as we leave today, I want you to think, what role do you play as a parishioner? What role do you play if you're on staff at a church, right? What role do you play in accountability, safety, and mutual submission in your church? If you don't know what that role is, I would encourage you to start conversations about that role because the reform we need in the church, guys, I'll finish this way. The reform we need in the church is not going to come from the top down. It's not going to come from senior pastors. It's not going to come from elder boards. It's not going to come from any of those. It's going to come from all of us, the ones with titles, the ones without titles, the ones who are attending and have been spectators, and the ones who have been putting the whole thing together. It's going to take all of us collectively bringing our hands, bringing our time, bringing our voices, and saying we're going to be the church, the bride of Christ. We're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're going to be a light, a bright light, a city on a hill to everyone around us. And that starts with we're going to be honest and humble with each other. We're going to mutually submit. We're going to tell the truth, and we're going to hold one another accountable. So I don't know what it is for you. I don't know what the answer is, but I hope that as you leave this segment in this live stream, I hope that the number one thing that you leave with is that you have a role to play in church accountability. You have a massive role in stopping the spiritual abuse and the scandal around us. And man, we need you. We need every single one of you. And I hope as you're leaving that you have ownership, you have belief, you have courage, and you are actively thinking about what role that you're going to play in this, because it isn't just talking heads like me. I'm not going to make as much of a difference as you're going to make right there in your community. And if you need practical resources, guys, even if you don't ask them to sign the pledge, that's okay. If you need practical resources to have these conversations with your church, know what to look for, just go to our website, use the pledge elements to know how to start those conversations, even if you don't ever tell anybody about the pledge. And this month, we're starting to reach out to a whole lot of people, starting in our community and beyond. That we're just going to start asking churches, no matter how many no's we get, because we want to find the yeses, the churches that will commit to health and safety and be able to send you to those churches. Because at the end of the day, we're going to see more churches grow and more churches, stay. When we're going to see that happen when by what we support. So if we support unhealthy churches, if we support churches without accountability, we're going to see more of those churches grow. If we support churches with accountability and we support churches that are committed to safety and churches that practice mutual submission, then that's what we're going to see grow. So a lot of it's going to come down to our support as well. We would love to help you in any way possible, but let me know your thoughts in the chat, in the comments. Would love to know what you're thinking, maybe what I missed. What parts of this do you think are most important? What are you seeing in the churches around you? What are you not seeing? Let us know. Let's continue the conversation. But that's it for this video. We'll be back with another one soon. But until then, grace and peace. All right. We still got one more segment in this live stream, so y'all don't go anywhere. But I don't think we've got producer Tracy here today. She had some stuff going on. So I'm going to go ahead and try to catch up through the chat. I'll be a little slower without Tracy, but you guys have been very active. So let's let you join the conversation before we jump into that last segment. And I appreciate you guys. These live streams are always much better when we get to have conversations because y'all are rolling in the chat. So I appreciate you a ton. Hillbilly Jackwagon says Lance Ford's book, Unleader, is great. Thank you for that recommendation. I'll check it out. I don't know Lance. I've heard Lance. I've heard him speak at Restore. I've heard him on some podcasts with Julie. I may try to get Lance on our podcast because I've appreciated Lance, but I don't know him. But that's a great recommendation on the book. I will check it out because if it's in line with the other stuff that he's done, then I think it'll be helpful. Linda says there doesn't seem to be anything that would disqualify a pastor. They just repent and come back after a few weeks, being really vague about what they needed to be restored from in the first place. I agree, Linda. I think that's part of why we need to decide in advance. When do we put someone on leave? When do we do independent investigations? How are things reported? What do we share with the church? Because if a sin is grievous enough for the pastor to be removed, the church needs to know something about it. Does the church need to know all of the gory details? No, but you need to have an idea of what that was. And the congregation, the church together, everybody has got to really be able to look and say, does this match up biblically? Because there are certain things biblically that we just can't repent and be restored from. There's certain things that we do that, me repenting doesn't mean I'm above reproach. What being above reproach means people look at it and say, I don't think that could happen again because of everything this person's got in place. So I think you're spot on. We got to be much slower to restore pastors, to ask those questions. And if you got a pastor they were removed for a little while, they come in, they're restored, but the church has been so vague that you have no idea why they were even removed, that would be a red flag for me. That would be a bit of a warning sign. Again, you don't have to know all the details, but it's important that you know enough to know, hey, that they should be restored and can be restored to ministry. The Weakest Link says they're protecting their jobs, careers, and reputation. They don't care about the church. If they did, they wouldn't be caught up in scandal. I agree. I agree to a degree. I think part of this, the weakest link, is a lot of these people really do love the church. These leaders get into church and ministry for the right reasons, but over time, over years and decades of a lack of accountability, they become more brave. They become more comfortable with their sin. And at some point, they don't even recognize the person that they become. So I agree that, like, at this point, they're getting caught up in scandal that they didn't really care about the church. But I think for many, they did care about the church. And it's literally the lack of accountability that allowed them to become a person that none of us recognize. So I think we could really, one of the best ways that we could serve the people who feel called to ministry, the church leaders who serve us. Scripture talks about not giving your leaders a hard time, for the ones that watch over your souls. Well, one of the best ways that we can serve them and honor them is actually to build those accountability systems. It is a kindness that is going to help keep them on track. They also said it's about protecting their money. And that is 100%. If money wasn't involved with that charismatic leader, a lot of times they wouldn't protect him. And in situations like Brady Boyd, think about the language that was used. Okay, and I agree with you. You said I'm probably being harsh, but I'm sick of these scandals. I am too. Think about the language that was used with Brady Boyd. The language was that he resigned and then he was forced to resign. The reality is that based on that ARC governance and that New Life has overseers and stuff like that, it is most likely that the overseers would have been the ones to have to remove him, but he was forced to resign by the elders because I think it got to the point to where, and again, I'm not speaking for New Life, but in a lot of these situations, the only time someone gets removed is when your scandal being public is costing us so much money that we have to turn against you. It's costing us money, or it's costing us our reputation, which will cost us money. Okay. And once the elders, because the elders have said, we've now got emails and documented evidence that proves that Brady Boyd knew about these things. So when they had that, I think it was kind of one of those of, hey, we can't make you resign, but if you don't resign, we're just going to leak all this stuff out publicly. We're going to put it all out where everybody can see it, and nobody will support you because this has went too far. And so that's why that language is important. When you hear that a pastor resigned or was forced to resign, a lot of times that's because enough people said, this is impacting our church, our money, our reputation. We have to do something. And they put pressure on that pastor to the point to where they say it's better for me and my reputation to resign than for these people to turn against me. So let me see. Angela says the consumer culture of the American church plays into it. Christians expect to be fed and not feed themselves. They're quick to overlook scandal if they can get their spiritual fix from ex-pastor. I couldn't agree more. I think you're spot on there. If you look at the first century church, the most stark difference, and there's a ton of differences between the first century church and our churches today. Okay. And everything shouldn't look the same. But when I look at the church in the Bible in the first century, the most stark difference I see is that the church today, we have turned into spectators. We come, we sit in a seat, we look at a person on a platform and on a stage, we wait to be entertained, we clap, we amen, we do all those things. And then we judge a church by how good's the preaching. We judge how was church. How was church today? Well, the message was really good, so church was good today. Or the worship was really good, so church was good today. Someone says, how was church? And you go, yeah, it was just kind of boring today. Message was too long. Worship wasn't good. They didn't pick my favorite songs. Like, all of that shows a consumer culture. We're coming to be entertained. In the first century, when you came to church, you had to bring your gift and you had to bring something. You were a part of this. This wasn't happening without you. You weren't a spectator, you were a participant. And I think that's probably the most stark difference I see between the early church and the church today is we have moved from participants to spectators in a big way. So I think that's huge. Let me see. Andrea says, I think it's a mix of lack of recognition, fear. Quote, not my problem was for self protection. It takes courage to speak up, and people aren't really courageous. I agree there too, Andrea. And I think that's why we ask churches to decide these things in advance when things are good. Our courage for a whole lot of us, I don't know if I would say most, but our courage tends to fail under pressure. Okay, so I want to be a courageous person. I think I'm a courageous person. People say all the time, we appreciate your courage to do the things that you've done. But um, do you know why I was courageous enough? Do you know why my wife and I were courageous enough to not sign the NDA that they gave her, to not take the severance money, and to publicly publish it? It's because when we heard years before rumblings that the church might be using NDAs. We said we can't prove that for sure. But I remember sitting at a table with a couple of friends, and we all said together, if they give us an NDA, we will not sign it. We will publish it. And here's the really sad thing: everybody else that sat around that table outside of my wife and I were eventually offered an NDA and signed it, because when push came to shove, their courage failed. We're not more courageous than really anybody, but we decided in advance what we were going to do, and then we just stuck to what we had decided we were going to do, as hard as it was. And if I hadn't decided that in advance, I'm not sure that we would have been able to do what we did, because it was very hard. So I agree that a lot of people lack courage. I also think um, that we get more courage when we decide in advance. Like when things are going well, that's when you decide how you're going to handle things when they're not going well. Andrew says, "Hey, Church Disrupted community, tuning in on my lunch break near Barrie, Ontario. Thank you so much for tuning in from Canada. We're probably going to go over your lunch break, but anything that you miss, there's going to be standalone videos as well. So thank you so much, Andrew, for tuning in and supporting us. Let me see. I'm not sure. We got a couple people in chat, and I apologize that we probably need to have muted already. But that is just because we don't have a producer today, but we normally will going forward. It's one of the reasons why we're doing that. All right. So let me see. Andrea says Ephesians 5:11, which I believe Ephesians 5:11, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. 1 Timothy 5:20, I know, is rebuke a sinning elder publicly if they keep sinning. But she says we're called to this for the protection of others, as you point out. I think the variable that's in play is human condition and how it's leveraged by people. I 100% agree. And here's the other thing: a lot of Christians don't know what those verses are. I'm not saying that you should have those verses memorized, but the amount of Christians I talk to that I quote 1 Timothy 5:20, and they're like, "Whoa, that's in the Bible. I've never read that." Right? Or you quote that out of Ephesians, or there's a lot of different things I quote out of the Bible, and Christians look at me like I've got a third eye. We're so biblically illiterate as a body. We've relied for so long, just like the commenter, and I can't remember who it was a moment ago who said it, but we relying on somebody else to feed us. Well, we've relied on somebody else to feed us for so long that we don't actually know what's in Scripture. And then when we do know what's in Scripture, we don't always actually abide by it or take the courage to do that. Right? Brian says they love not the truth, nor have they ever seen him or known him. They'll be shocked and censor, argue with what Scripture plainly states. Very similar, goes right along with what Andrea just said, which is, hey, the Scriptures already kind of tell us how to act. Part of our problem is we're not following Scriptures and building these accountability systems, because all of this stuff it's fleshing out Scripture and it's using Scripture. Scripture's already told us what to do, so let's employ that Scripture as we go. Particular Platypus says, "Oh, I forgot, 1:00. Well, hi, we're glad that you joined, even if you joined a little late. Glad that you're here. I was actually a little late today too. It started at 1:15 because it was a half day for our kids at school. But next week, hopefully, we'll all be rolling on a well-oiled schedule." Rob says, "Personally, I don't think there are any more church scandals than there were 50 years ago or so when I was younger. We only perceive it as such for a few reasons. The first is due to information speed." Um, I think you got a point there, potentially, Rob. I think what it shows us is it's not necessarily that the scandals have grown, but if that's the truth, then that means for decades, how many of these scandals went undetected, right? When you think about the Reformation, why did the Reformation happen when it did in the 1500s? The Protestant Reformation happened because of the printing press. Okay. Martin Luther, that 95 Thesis, the work of the reformers was able to spread because for the first time they had a printing press. They could spread these ideas and they could spread the Bible to people. Okay. Well, now I think we're in the middle, or not even in the middle. I think we're in the early stages of a new reformation. I think this reformation is calling the church back. We're reforming the church back to how we're supposed to behave as the church, back to accountability, back to being a light in a city on a hill. But what is sparking this reformation? Well, a tool just like the printing press, it's social media. Everybody has a platform and everybody has a voice. So, yeah, 25 years ago, if my church had handed me an NDA, well, the most I could do is tell my friends they handed me an NDA and I didn't sign it. Okay. When this church handed us an NDA, we tried to have a Matthew 18 conversation. We tried to have church discipline. We told them we weren't going to sign it. And when they called our bluff and tried to silence us, we just posted it online for the world to see, right? Social media is the tool that is allowing people to shine a light on these scandals that weren't able to before, right? So I think on one hand, you're probably right that the scandals haven't increased significantly, but that doesn't make me feel any better about it because I'm sitting here thinking, how many of these scandals will we never hear about? Will someone never share about on social media, or the people who are a part of it don't know how to work social media, or they've already passed away? Like, it just makes me wonder how long this has been going on. And going forward, we're not going to have less transparency. Everybody has a platform. People are going to continue to get more and more of a voice. So it's more important than ever, I think, that we are practicing good, very good accountability. Benjamin says Christians prefer predators for leaders, and that's why you love Trump more than Christ. All right. So we don't normally ban people and stuff like that. But what I will do is when someone comes in and wants to like force politics and stuff like that and just force us to argue over things, who's not even a Christian who's listening, a lot of times I'm just going to kick them out of the comments so we don't have to deal with that. And again, that's why we normally have a producer. So I don't actually end up saying that. So yeah, particular platypus said, "Are there no mods?" Not today. There are not, because our none of our moderators could be on the chat, and our producer couldn't be on the chat. So some of you that are here more often, eventually we may make you guys mods, but we normally have a volunteer producer who is taking care of that. So I apologize, but I will take care of it as I can. And hopefully that didn't bother anybody too bad in the chat while we were going. So anyway, apologies for that. Okay. Particular platypus. Church disrupted. Little Benjamin needs a corner to sit in. I didn't even read the rest of his stuff. And again, I apologize. If I had seen it, it was while I was looking at the camera, because I got to look over here to see that stuff. But if I had seen it, I would have just deleted it and banned him from the chat earlier. And I know Tracy would have done the same. Some of our other mods would have done the same. Sometimes these midday live streams, we don't have anybody, but we try to have them as much as we can. Life on Hoth says my own church kicked the can down the road on defining even a small thing as a way to report SA for years. Until it was forced, it was a steep learning curve. Best to be proactive on many things. I think you're spot on. I think proactively making these decisions is always going to be better for everybody involved in the church. We don't make good decisions under pressure, guys. We just don't as humans. There's a few people who make decisions well under pressure. I'm probably wired more like that than others. But even I would say I don't make good decisions under pressure. So I don't want to make important decisions under pressure. I want to make them in advance. And I think about it almost like a will. Okay. I don't want, if I was to pass away unexpectedly, that's not my plan. Just like church is saying, well, we don't think we're abusive. We don't think this could happen in our church. Well, my plan is not to pass away unexpectedly, but if I do, I don't want to leave it to probate courts to, figure out how to take care of my kids and what to do and everything else. I want to be proactive. I want to have a will for that. I want to specify clearly and legally what I want to happen. And I think most people would say that. Yet the reality is more of us than not don't have wills, right? Mine's not as up to date as it needs to be. So it's just a good reminder. Like that's why we need accountability, even for the accountability systems. It's important that we have people like you, Life on Hoth, that's saying, "Hey, I'm talking to my church. Even if they're kicking the can down the road, I'm going to continue to bring this up until we decide in advance because it's important." And human nature is to say that we don't need to do that, right? Let me see. Hamish said, "I was struggling with some theological issues and tried to discuss it with my pastor. He avoided me as if I had a contagious disease, even when I asked for numerous appointments. I'm so sorry. Like, we have said it since probably episode 1 of this podcast, almost 100 episodes ago. Um, you can learn a lot more about a church from how they handle questions than about anything else. And I'm just so sorry. A safe church will always field your questions. And I think even Lance talked about that. He said, questions and even dissent is okay in a safe and an accountable environment. So I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, right? Let me see. And I apologize. I don't know what all Benjamin was saying. But I apologize. I see some of you blocked him on your end, but he is blocked now. And that's why when you see Tracy, when Tracy's here and Tracy's in the comments, tell Tracy how much you love her and how much you appreciate her volunteering your time and doing this, because we're better when we got Tracy here, right? Let me see. I'm trying to get through that stuff. Abby popped in. Abby, I'm glad that you're here. Just so you guys know, Abby's one of our mods, so she can help us with that. Sometimes she's able to be on, sometimes she's not. But Abby, we appreciate you so much and the work that you do. She said, sorry, I just now saw this is a premiere. Grateful for you. Abby is awesome. Tracy's awesome. If you see anybody else with that, and you should be able to see it as well, but the little wrench beside their name, that's someone who is a moderator for us. So always, please tell them thank you, because they're amazing people who help us. Andy says churches are forgiving and trusting places and are thus a magnet for every type of predator. They can be if we're not intentional. I think a lot of bad actors see the church as an easy target. And it shouldn't be that way. If we're proactive and we have good systems in place, it should not be that way. But when we're making pastors kings and we don't have accountability and we don't have these systems in place, then yeah, you're going to have really bad actors be drawn to that, including some who are going to stand into ministry. Angela says we need to be more comfortable being uncomfortable. I agree as well. These are always uncomfortable conversations, and when you ask those questions, you're gonna feel bad asking them of your pastor. It's not gonna feel comfortable for a pastor or an elder to be asked those questions, or a staff member or a volunteer. Nobody likes those things, but out of that discomfort, I think really good things happen. Abby says, honestly, that's why I love the church I go to now. It's a tiny church, and there's practically no consumerism involved. That was one of the reasons, Abby, why we ended up at the church that we ended up at as well. It was very small. We've gotten bigger. We've grown. We've added a church in with a merger. But I also appreciate that as we've grown, our pastors, our elders, the staff, the deacons, everybody's really asking questions of how do we protect what was so good and safe and healthy about the small church as it grows. And they're just asking questions that I never heard churches ask, and I never asked when I was on church staff. So there's definitely some good ones out there, and I'm glad that you have found one. Let me see. Trying to get through as much of y'all's comments as possible. I see Josh Crease in the chat. Just wanted to say thank you, Jeff, for doing what you do. I appreciate you, brother. Josh is watching from Canada as well. So we got a few different people north of the border that are watching today. Josh, I really appreciate you and all of your support. Andrea says, hey, pray for the people in Portland, Oregon, for all the bummer stuff that we talk about. The PDX crusade last week was hugely encouraging. Pray that they find a healthy church connection. Absolutely. Pray for them. And guys, I wanted to say this on the stream as well, because we talked about Russell B. Johnson before. And I don't care to call people out. I've called him out. I'm not, we're not on the same page. I'm not a big fan of him as a pastor, but their church also experienced just a wild tragedy. Don't want to say, let me see. I'll see if I can show it on the screen for you guys. I don't want to say the words because nobody is going to like that in the YouTube algorithm. But if you haven't seen that, I would just ask you to pray for them, because they got a lot of stuff going on, experienced a tragedy. And even if it's a pastor or a church that we don't agree with, guys, this stuff should never happen. Like, it should just never happen in a church. Why do we talk about it's this article right here that you can read on the Roy's Report, but is why we do this. Why do we talk about spiritual abuse? Why do we do all of these hard conversations? Well, we have them because we believe the church should be the safest place on the planet. And even if it's church that we disagree with, or even if it's church that's hurt people in other ways, like the thought of, man, I went to church and I wasn't physically safe is sickening. So please be in prayer for Russell Johnson and his church as well. So that just reminded me, and I'm glad that you brought up um, Portland, because it made me think of it there. Let me see. Looks like you guys are having a great conversation in the chat. I can't get to all of them. Just trying to make sure that I've got to most people that I have seen. Y'all got to stop talking about the cheesesteaks. I got to write these down, Angela, but y'all got to stop talking about them because you're making me hungry. I haven't eaten lunch yet, and my stomach is rumbling with you guys talking about these cheesesteaks now. So anyway, I got to move on from that comment, or my mouth is going to start watering. Get a drink here. Angela says Ruslan covered this. The circumstances are wild. I haven't even got to look into a lot of the details of it. I just saw it this morning, going through things a little bit late, just because the last few days have been really busy in the background working on a project that we're doing. And yeah, it's just it's heartbreaking. And this is a good reminder that it's a good reminder how important it is to pray for people, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. Like, man, we're one body, and when one part of the body hurts, we all hurt. Just super, super tragic. Abby says, I'm on a diet right now, and cheesesteaks are not in my meal plan. Cheesesteaks should never be in my meal plan, but they're always. Cheesesteaks and cheesecake should never be in my meal plan, and I'm never going to turn them down. Probably. All right, guys. I appreciate y'all. Let's go ahead and let's get into the last segment today. Continue the conversation in the chat. You guys are awesome. Let me know any questions, concerns that you have as we go through this next story. But let's move into this last one, and then we'll close down things today, because one of those projects, again, a huge project we've been working on, I've got an appointment within the next hour with another attorney. Really tired of talking to attorneys on these things, but to make sure that we are doing our best due diligence before we take a major step to hopefully be able to stop some of these shenanigans. So be praying for us as we do that. But let's get into this last segment, and we're going to actually talk about Brady Boyd. We talked about him in the last segment a little bit, but he's a recently removed megachurch pastor out of Colorado. We're going to talk about how he's literally was just removed, forced to resign a couple of weeks ago, within the last month, and he's already back in ministry and being supported by some huge name pastors. So it's just it is super frustrating how quickly, just like we talked about a moment ago, somebody was in the chat saying about that we're too quick to restore pastors. Well, this guy's already back in ministry, trying to act like nothing happened. So let's go ahead and hit this segment. I'll talk about barbecue now. Killing my stomach. Killing me. It's almost impossible to stop spiritual abuse in the church when pastors and elders and spiritual power brokers cover for each other. But the reality is that happens way too often, and it looks like that's exactly what's happening with a recently disgraced and removed megachurch pastor, Brady Boyd. Now, if you're not familiar, Brady was forced to resign from New Life Church in Colorado when it came out through some disclosures in court that disgraced pastor Robert Morris had filed. But through those disclosures in court, it came out that it's likely he should have known. Brady Boyd should have known before he became the pastor of New Life Church that Robert Morris's inappropriate relationship that he called it for years was actually SA of a minor, that he should have known, and he didn't say anything. But then he was forced to resign as his elders uncovered documents and emails that show that even though he denied it, they said it shows that he was involved and he knew all these details, but he didn't do anything. So that's happened very, very recently. He was removed. But guys, surprise, surprise, shocker to probably nobody, he's already not just planning a return to ministry, he's already engaging in a return to ministry. And let me go ahead, share my screen, and I will show you guys that today. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about it. You see the headline there. Brady Boyd launches new ministry a month after being forced out of a Colorado megachurch. Now, again, We had some people talking about in the chat earlier on the live stream. We're way too quick to, as a Christian church, to try to restore pastors and try to put them right back on the platform because they're talented, they're good speakers, they're charismatic, they bring in money, they make us feel good. For all of those reasons, we're restoring people who have never even at times repented for what they've done. And guys, there are certain things, like I'm just going to say it. If you have covered up the mistreatment of a child, you don't ever need to be in ministry again. I don't care how much you repent. You're not above reproach. You can't do it. So for me, based on what I've seen, I would have to say that what we have seen, what we have heard, the documents they say that they have looking at scripture, I would say that Brady Boyd is disqualified from ministry and doesn't need to be in any sort of ministry yet, less than a month. Here he is. And again, this article is from July 23rd. It's taking me a little bit to get to it, but you see Brady there. And it says, a month after being forced to resign from a Colorado megachurch for inaccurate statements about his knowledge of Robert Morris's child SA, Brady Boyd has launched a new ministry. And of course, he's not just launched a new ministry, he's taking donations. And I bet if you pay attention to it, I bet in the first month or two of being a ministry, Brady asked for donations probably 10 times as much as we've asked for donations the entire, over a year the SAI has been in existence, because that is the playbook. But Brady announced the ministry called Psalm 68 Ministries in a private Facebook group called Support Brady Boyd. If you have a pastor who is removed from ministry because he knew about Child SA and didn't say anything, why in the world would you create? Someone had to create this Facebook page, but even if it was Brady himself or his wife, why is anybody a member of this Facebook page? Why would you be a member of a social media page to support someone who has done that thing? But I digress. They posted in this group that they founded this ministry on June 21st, very soon after Brady Boyd resigned as senior pastor. He uses Psalm 68 and basically says, hey, it talks about God being a father of the fatherless, defender of the widows. I haven't read Psalm 68, 5, and 6. But he says, we want to complete our ministry careers caring for the people Jesus always sees, but are often forgotten about by society. Now, here is my biggest problem with that. You were starting a ministry to care for the people Jesus sees, but are often forgotten about by society after you were removed from being a pastor because you overlooked sin against the forgotten about, because you overlooked abuse and criminal activity over the forgotten about. It's just really rich that this is the verse he chose. This is what he decided to do. Now, guys, I'm going to call a spade a spade. This is just my opinion for legal purposes. This is just my opinion. But my opinion is that this is not about completing your ministry careers to help people. In my opinion, this looks like it is completing your ministry career because you need money and you need some cheddar cheese, and you don't want to all of a sudden not be able to live your same lifestyle on the back end of your life. So you're starting this ministry, and he's going to say all these good things it's about. And I would challenge two things. One, I don't think he's the right person at all to do all these good things he's talking about. Two, the last thing he's going to say is it's going to allow him to preach. You're going to see it here in a minute. And my guess is that that's what this whole thing is about. Let's create this nonprofit so we can take tax-free donations, so that it's got to be more than a nonprofit. It needs to be a ministry and tied to a church so that we don't have to report what we're doing with these donations, and the government doesn't have to know, and we don't have to tell anybody. And we're going to talk about all these good things to solicit donations, when the reality is it looks like the biggest reason for doing this is it's going to allow him to preach in churches so he can continue taking those big honorariums. And if you missed it, we talked about it in previous videos, especially the ARC investigation, the celebrity preacher scam. But guys, I was once one of the people in charge of paying people these honorariums, and these big name speakers, many of them, they're not getting out of bed for less than $10,000. You see that famous pastor preaching at your church, a lot of times that's a $10,000 to $30,000 honorarium. Okay. And they're doing this at each other's churches. So if he can do that, then he's okay. He doesn't need a salary. He doesn't have a need. So again, I could be totally wrong. You would have to ask Brady Boyd. But as someone in ministry who is looking at Brady Boyd, looking at this from the outside, that's what it looks like to me, in my humble opinion. But he says, This includes pastors who have been wounded by the rigors of ministry. It's important that he says he's going to protect a group of people. And before he talks about anybody else, the first group of people that he says he's going to defend are pastors who have been wounded by the rigors of ministry. Now, I've talked about this in previous conversations. I'm talking about this more with some pastors going forward. Pastors are mistreated by parishioners, especially when those parishioners have more authority than them in some of these situations. There are situations where like deacons and volunteers and big donors have the authority to even spiritually abuse pastors. So I'm not saying that pastors aren't mistreated, but think about this list and then ask yourself, does it make sense in this situation that he's starting out with protecting pastors who were wounded before protecting the other people on this list? Because this sounds very self-serving since he's trying to paint himself as a pastor who's been unjustly wounded. But he says includes pastors who have been wounded by the rigors of ministry. It includes kids in developing countries and those needing clean drinking water, education, medical services in Central and South Africa. So, one, if you got a guy who was removed from ministry because he did not report the essay of a child, and he says, I'm starting a new ministry, and one of the things we're going to do is take care of children in need. I would say that we have certain lists and registries in the United States for exactly that reason. Okay. I would say that Brady, I don't know if you're paying any attention to this. It feels like you're the worst person in the world to be a fit for this kind of ministry. Okay. But again, how do you get donations? It's much easier to get donations for kids and kids who need food and clean drinking water than it is to go, hey, could y'all donate so I can keep preaching and keep getting, good honorariums and keep making money? People aren't going to donate to that the same way they're going to donate with this. But even with that, even even as hypocritical as this sounds, even as dangerous as this sounds, before he ever talked about the kids, he talked about helping wounded pastors. All right, you can see where it looks like his mind is at. You can see his post there, so you can go to this and you can read the whole post. But again, it talks about here, however, it was Boyd's alleged failure to act on behalf of Cindy Clemishere, who had been essayed as a child and then lying about it, that cost Boyd his job. But now he's starting this nonprofit to protect kids. Okay. Now, there's a couple of other things that are going on here. They talk more about why he was removed, and all that sort of stuff. They get some commentary and some comment from Cindy Clemishere's sister, all that sort of stuff. But I want to get down to this piece of the article. Trinity Fellowship and Jimmy Witcher support Brady Boyd. Well, you may ask, how is he starting this brand new ministry? And doesn't it take longer than just a week or two to be approved as a church with the IRS? Well, yes, it does. How do you get around that? You come under the umbrella of an existing church and ministry. And if you haven't watched the Religion Business documentary yet, we did a kind of a full overall review of that. We've reviewed a couple of episodes. We're going to continue reviewing those episodes in the coming weeks. But if you haven't watched it yet, one of the things they talk about is ministries and nonprofits that are just regular nonprofits that become associations and conventions of churches. And then because they're tied to that church, they are now considered a church. They don't have to file anything. So if you want to start a new nonprofit and you want it to be a church to have all those protections, and you don't want to be transparent, and you don't want to have to try to petition the IRS for it or wait months, then all you need to do is start it as a regular nonprofit while it's already under the umbrella of a church. And then it immediately can be petitioned to become an association and convention of that church. And never, ever do you have to actually report any of those things. Well, that's what it looks like he's doing with Trinity Fellowship. Okay. Boyd says his new ministry will be based in his Colorado Springs home. Okay. So it's based in Colorado Springs. Tell me how this makes sense. So instead of having any church in Colorado, even in his state, that would support this ministry, he's basing the ministry in Colorado Springs, but he's operating under the authority of the elders of Trinity Fellowship Church in Amarillo, Texas. Why is he operating out of a church in Texas when he's in Colorado and doing the ministry in Colorado? Probably because this church in Texas was probably the closest one that he could find that would actually support him. But they did support him. And because they're willing to support him, we got this guy getting right back in ministry. And his plan is to do ministry that involves children, which should make everybody's alarm bells go off based on what happened. But it says, of course, Boyd's got a relationship with these people. Boyd was on staff at Trinity in the 1990s and remains an apostolic elder there. That phrase, apostolic elder, overseer, apostolic overseer, any of those phrases should make your spidey senses start tingling, okay? Every red flag you have should go off when you see those phrases. You should start asking questions because the Bible is not going to talk about apostolic overseers or elders, but people in that arc model of governance, that kingmaker model of governance, that CEO, president of the corporation who picks his own accountability model of governance, they like to call the governing body apostolic elders. And guess what? Brady Boyd was on staff at Trinity in the 90s, and he remains an apostolic elder for them. So now he is supposed to be the spiritual apostolic oversight, the accountability for this church. And now he's asking their pastor and their elders, who he's the accountability for, to now be his accountability in this new nonprofit. So do you see the circle that we're making? If you hold me accountable, I'll hold you accountable. And if you don't hold me accountable, I won't hold you accountable, right? It's a good old boys network. It is the definition of a conflict of interest, okay? This wouldn't fly in any sort of corporate board, any sort of secular business, unless it's a family-owned business, okay? It is a feedback loop. It is a closed feedback loop. So he's an apostolic elder at this church, and now he's submitting to those elders for his new ministry. But it says Trinity is also where Jimmy Evans, who previously served as an elder at Gateway with Boyd, pastored for 3 decades. Evans also serves as an apostolic elder at Trinity. So let's think about a few things there. One, if you've been listening for very long, you know that Jimmy Evans has had his fair share of problems. Jimmy Evans was caught on a recording, okay, by Jonathan and Susie Lamb. He was caught on a recording exhibiting spiritually abusive behavior when he literally told Jonathan Lamb that his mom, Joni Lamb, the CEO of Daystar Television, was the voice of God to him. And if you listen to that recording, it is textbook behavior that I would call spiritual abuse. And I think most people who are in this world would define as spiritual abuse because it meets the definition from my vantage point, okay? So not only is Jimmy Evans involved, okay, but Jimmy Evans is also an apostolic elder at Trinity. Who are the apostolic elders at Trinity Fellowship in Amarillo, Texas? Who are the people that are supposed to hold their pastor accountable? Who are the only 2 people who, based on this form of governments that it looks like they're using, who are the only 2 people who can normally remove that pastor? Jimmy Evans and Brady Boyd. So Brady Boyd, coming in a way as the only threat to this pastor, the only person who could kind of be his boss, says, hey, I want to start a new ministry and it's going to be under your church. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? Say no? When this is one of the only people who might could hold him accountable? Again, this is a huge conflict of interest. But also, if you go to a church and both of your apostolic elders, 100% of the apostolic elders we know about, and usually there's like 2 or 3, maybe 5 most on these boards. These are the only 2 I know here. When your apostolic elders are people like Jimmy Evans and Brady Boyd, who have been credibly accused of spiritual abuse, not only credibly accused, but there's documents that New Life says they got to prove it. And I've heard the recordings with Jimmy Evans. You got a problem, okay? This church is a problem to begin with because their accountability are literally the people who won't receive accountability. Their accountability are people who are disqualified from ministry. Their accountability are people who have shown a propensity for spiritual abuse and for sin, okay? But it gets worse. As reported earlier by TRR, court documents filed by Morris indicate that Jimmy Evans also knew about Morris's essay of Clemishire in 2007. And according to an email from then Gateway elder Tom Lane, Evans attended a meeting in 2007 with Morris and other elders to discuss the allegations. So it looks like he knew the same things that Brady knew and that he should have from this information known that Cindy Clemishire was underage when this essay happened and that it was essay and it was not an inappropriate relationship. Okay. Not only that, though, look at this. How do we know that? Because of a 2007 email from Tom Lane to other elders. Now, double check me. I could be wrong. I'm trying to think about this off the top of my head, but I believe that Tom Lane was one of the apostolic overseers with Dr. Michael Brown of Mercy Culture, if I'm not mistaken. Last time I checked, they had taken that off their website, but we could go to the Wayback Machine and we could look. I should have looked this up before. I wasn't even thinking about it, but I'm pretty sure Tom Lane was the other apostolic elder, which means that the apostolic elders or apostolic overseers of Mercy Culture, who we've also talked about multiple times in multiple videos, that we shouldn't be surprised. If that's the case, we should not be surprised when we're consistently seeing disqualifying, sinful behavior out of Landon and Heather Schott. If their overseers are people like Dr. Brown, who has disqualified himself from ministry and had credible accusations and had an investigation that came back and said he was guilty of sexually abusive misconduct, and then Tom Lane, who was a part of this group, who really should have known, was an elder at Gateway, and by all accounts that I can see, it looks like he should have known that Cindy Clemishire was underage, and this was the SA of a minor. Okay, so again, you got Brady Boyd and Jimmy Evans, who are the apostolic overseers and accountability of this church in Texas. And then you've got Tom Lane, if I remember correctly, and I know it was Dr. Michael Brown, the apostolic overseers of Mercy Culture. But then when Dr. Michael Brown is coming under fire after this investigation, who is it that was trying to restore him? Mercy Culture. Why would we not try to restore the person who is holding us accountable? And then Brady Boyd needs to be restored. So what does he do? I need a new ministry. I need a church to work under. I need to be able to take these donations. Well, he just goes to one of the churches he oversees and they start his ministry. Do you see how this feedback loop works? Do you see why we keep having these church scandals? Because there is a good old boy network that has built a circular feedback loop where it's literally one big conflict of interest, where it's one good old boy versus another good old boy looking out for each other. And the biggest problem is that none of them are good old boys. There's not good in this, okay? And if you looked at the thumbnail on the live stream for this, I don't know if it'll be on the thumbnail for the actual video when we put it out, but the thumbnail on the live stream, I've literally got Chris Hodges in a picture where he's standing arm in arm with Robert Morris. Because guess what? Robert Morris was one of the apostolic overseers for Chris Hodges in Church of the Highlands until all of this came out. It is all interconnected and they're covering for one another. And you're going to see, well, it looks, let me just say it looks like it would be easy for them to cover for one another. And in certain situations like Brady Boyd, Mercy Culture, Dr. Michael Brown, it looks like they're covering for one another. Again, that's just my opinion. Can't prove that they're all covering for one another. But doesn't it look like that? Isn't there smoke there? And you're going to see some more connections here in just a moment, okay? But let me see. Let's go ahead and move down. Despite these facts, Trinity Fellowship Senior Pastor Jimmy Witcher seems unfazed. At a Q&A time with his congregation a few weeks ago, Witcher stated, and I quote, "We can find no disqualifying conduct that Brady committed. Therefore, Brady continues to be a friend and apostolic elder of Trinity Fellowship. I'm proud to call him a friend, and I'm proud to call him an apostolic elder." Now, that's weird. And again, just me, just my vantage point. I would not be proud to call someone a friend if they knew about or should have known about a child SA case and then they covered it up just to keep one of their friends in power and make money and stay in ministry. I wouldn't call him a friend. I wouldn't call him an apostolic elder. But listen to how Witcher frames this. And again, Witcher is the pastor of Trinity Fellowship, and Brady Boyd is one of his overseers, okay? Witcher also said that he had spoken to the overseers at New Life about the situation with Boyd, okay? Now, keep in mind, the elders at New Life are the ones who told Brady Boyd he needed to resign. The elders at New Life are the ones who said, "We've got the emails that show you were in all these emails and you should have known." Okay, that was the elders. If you go back to our two-part investigation talking about ARC and you look at those example bylaws of what that hybrid church governance model the ARC proposes is supposed to look like, the elders are the ones that have to call in the overseers But the overseers can only come in when called in by the elders, but the overseers are the only ones that can actually hold the pastor accountable. Again, now these elders, because they had these emails, it looks like they forced Brady to resign. And if you don't resign, we're just going to release all this stuff. It's going to get worse for you. You're guilty. You need to resign. That's what it sounds like. Okay. Notice Witcher did not reach out. Never going to say in this article that he ever reached out. It doesn't say in that recording. He didn't tell his congregation, as far as I understand, that he reached out to the elders and asked to see those emails. Instead, who did he reach out to? He reached out to the overseers. Well, why? Because just like all these other overseers, they're in the same network. Let's see who these overseers are. It says these overseers are Greg Surratt, the president of the scandal-plagued Association of Related Churches, or ARC, and Larry Stockstill, the founder of Bethany Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, it says that those are the two overseers. It doesn't list any other overseers for New Life. I don't know if there are or not, but we just talked about all of these other connections. And then you have Chris Hodges standing with Robert Morris, because Robert Morris was one of his apostolic elders before all this happened. Well, Greg Surratt is one of the guys who started and founded ARC with Chris Hodges. ARC is now ran out of Church of the Highlands. Chris Hodges and Greg Surratt are buddy, and guys, it gets worse. Larry Stockstill, and again, I've talked about Larry before. I've met Larry. All of my experiences with Larry have been phenomenal. But there is some smoke around Larry. Larry just, it is kind of a nepotistic succession, it looks like, with his son at Bethany. But I know this because they're proud of it. Larry is actually, he was the pastor of Chris Hodges. He knows all these guys. He was one of their mentors that sent them all out. So when Witcher says, I contacted the elders at New Life, yes, but what you really should have said was, I contacted a couple of my buddies in my same circle who know Brady and know Jimmy and know all of these guys and knew and supported Robert Morris. They were big fans of his teaching, the blessed life and all of that. Yeah, I called some people who run in my same circles and they said there's nothing to see here. What else would they say? Of course they're going to say there's nothing to see here because they don't want anybody looking at what's going on with them. And again, guys, this is just, I'm piecing this together from my perspective. This is all just my opinion. But if you go back and you look at part 1 and part 2 of the ARC investigation, you actually see, I believe it's in part 2, where John Gray, who used to be a member of the lead team of ARC just a few years ago, he said, hey, something along the lines of, I was caught in sin, and then none of my brothers in Christ came to help me. And he says, it's crazy when you look around and none of them are coming to help you because they've got worse things going on than you do, and they don't want their stuff coming out. Okay. And again, I actually give the quote on that video. You can go and you can look it up, but it's something like that. So again, we ask, is he saying the quiet part out loud, that a lot of these pastors are covering for each other because they want to protect their own interest and they don't want people looking at the stuff that they're doing? Well, it looks like that's exactly what's going on here, because Jimmy Witcher didn't ask the elders for those emails. He asked his buddies, who were also overseers and are a part of this one big circle. It also says Stockstill was an overseer at New Life in 2007, and documents suggest he too was informed about Morris's essay of Clemishire at that time. And if that is true, then if that's true, then Larry would be disqualified as well. Again, I can't say that that's true. That's just what's been reported. But Jimmy Witcher told his congregation, I reached out to them in this process as well, just basically saying, hey, it just is a matter of due diligence. Is there something here I'm not seeing? Are we missing something? And both of them, again, I reached out to New Life's overseers, two people he's friends with. He knows that, knew Robert Morris, that were a part of all this. Two people. Yeah. He reached out to two people. That was reaching out to the overseers. Can you imagine a mega church like this? And they're the only people who could hold the pastor accountable in any sort of way by the bylaws was likely two people who he's friends with and likely handpicked. Okay. So I wouldn't have expected them to say anything else. Now, of course, the Rose Report reached out to Trinity. They reached out to Jimmy Witcher, but they didn't hear anything back. But it says, in addition to providing oversight, Trinity Fellowship is receiving donations for Boyd's ministry. So all gifts are tax deductible. And this is important. A search of both Colorado and Texas businesses did not find a listing for Psalm 68 Ministries. It's also not listed with the IRS as a tax exempt organization. Why is that? Well, it's likely that way because, again, this is going to be created from the beginning as an association and convention of Trinity Church so that you don't have to have any sort of transparency. But I want to look at this before we finish out as well. Let's just go to Trinity's website and let's look at their team here, their team. And you also if you click our leadership, it takes you to this place. So this is them telling you this is how our church is led. It has the senior pastor right there as the senior pastor of Trinity Fellowship. Jimmy Witcher is the chairman of the board of elders and leads the executive team of Trinity Fellowship Association of Churches. The executive leader team may be the trustees, but here's what happens. Just think about this. Again, think about this governance structure that so many ARC churches and related churches to them teach. He's the chairman of the board, and the chairman of the board in their teaching is also who they call the CEO and president of the corporation, not the church, the corporation, because they say the church is split in two halves, the spiritual side and the corporate side. Now, I haven't seen the corporate side in the Bible, but they say it's split into the corporate side and your pastor needs to be your CEO. So likely, from everything we can see, it looks like he is operating as the CEO. Also, he leads as the chairman of the board, he leads the elders, and he leads the executive leadership team. The executive leadership team, if you come down here and you look at it right here, it's his wife, okay? And it's other people whose paychecks he signs. It's a small 4-person leadership team. He signs all their paychecks. He's married to one of them, so I'm sure they hold him very accountable, okay? But it says Jimmy and his wife Kim became members of Trinity Fellowship in 1994 and have served in many different areas of ministry. They're passionate about helping people. Before entering full-time ministry at Trinity Fellowship, they spent over 25 years in business, where Jimmy gained extensive leadership experience while managing product development, international sales, and corporate marketing. So it sounds like he went from being a business leader in business to getting a promotion to the CEO of the corporation called Trinity Fellowship Church. That's what it sounds like, okay? But it gives more information about them. That's it. Again, this is when you click on leadership, this is what you get. The senior pastor who leads the elders, the senior pastor who leads the executive leadership team. The executive leadership team includes 2 people who he's their boss, one person he's married with, and then everything else is just the campus pastors. You know what you won't see anywhere here? You won't see overseers. But again, who were his overseers? Let's see if we can find this so I can show you. And I missed it. Who were his overseers? I won't show you, but if you remember from early on, his overseers was Greg Surratt, his overseers was Brady Boyd and Jimmy Evans. Okay, they don't even list those people, and those 2 people are probably the only people who could actually remove him. Do you see, when we talked about today earlier on the live stream, we've asked the question in other videos, why do these church scandals keep happening? Why do we keep seeing so much of this sin repeat itself, this scandal repeat itself? Why is spiritual abuse so common? Well, you find a situation where a pastor is disqualified, forced to resign, he's removed. Within a month, he's back in ministry, totally untransparent, building it as under the umbrella of or association and convention of another church where he's the overseer as a conflict of interest. And then that guy says, well, it's okay because I reached out to these other overseers who are our friends. And it's just this one big circle of, well, you know what? We're going to say we think he's innocent and we're going to put him right back in ministry. And by the way, none of you can find any disclosures, including business disclosures, because we're going to hide it all under the umbrella of the church. And when you start asking questions, how in the world could they do this? It makes a whole lot more sense when you understand that ARC proposed form of governance, that hybrid form of governance, because then you realize, well, if all of these pastors are CEOs and presidents who can only be held accountable by the overseers they choose and they all run in the same circles, then the only way they can really be removed is if they're forced under pressure from, I don't know, something like their elder board that says, we've got these emails if you don't resign. So he resigned, but here's the problem. And I don't know what else is going on. Like maybe there are good reasons. I don't know why they don't release those emails. I would encourage New Life's elders release those emails publicly. Like all of the evidence you've got, release it. Because unless this guy is completely forced out of ministry, and the only way he's going to be forced out of ministry, I'm just telling you, the only way it looks like he's going to be forced out of ministry is if Jimmy Witcher, those things come out and he thinks his church is going to stop giving and stop supporting him. If it's going to hurt his livelihood, then, and probably only then, would he turn against Brady Boyd, because we don't know if Brady Boyd or any of these other guys have any, have anything that they know about him that he wouldn't want to get out. And again, I'm not saying that there is, but that's what it sounded like. That's what it sounded like John Gray was talking about, right? So again, unless there's enough pressure to say it's going to hurt me more to cover for you, it's going to hurt me more to have you under my umbrella of ministry, until that happens, then what we've got is we got a situation where even when someone's disqualified because they overlooked the essay of a child, they're right back in ministry, because these governance structures don't have any real accountability. And we just got kings making kings and covering for each other. That's what it looks like to me. So when you ask, why is this happening? It's because we got way more churches than we realize, guys, that have no accountability. And look, I don't think this is the majority of churches. Someone's always going to ask, Jeff, you're just bagging on the church. Do you really think this is all churches? No, I don't even think this is the majority of churches. But here's what I will say. I see more churches than not that are being planted and are brand new and are growing really fast and being called successful. The new model, I see the majority of those new churches that are being successful doing it this way, which means if we don't stand up and say, as the body of Christ, we require a greater level of accountability and we will not support churches with these sham governance structures. If we don't do something about it, then in 2 or 3 decades, the majority of churches in the United States, or even if it's not the majority of churches, it would at least be probably the majority of Christians, because the majority of Christians in America, if I'm not mistaken, last time I looked at the numbers, attend the top 9% largest churches. Okay, so whether it's the majority of churches, the majority of Christians, if we keep going down this road, eventually this will be normal. And guys, if this is normal, then the church in America might as well just fold up and shut down, because we ain't going to be looking anything like the church Jesus called us to be. And he's going to remove his hand. We got to be better. We cannot call ourselves the church and do this. So again, I said this earlier in the live stream. I said this on another video. We all have a role to play in holding the church accountable. Because it's not we go to church, so we hold the church accountable. We are the church. And if we allow people and churches and organizations to act like big corporations and kings and just jump back into ministry no matter what, then we become complicit in the sin. Okay. And I'm going to tell you, when nothing else will smoke somebody like this out, if the donations dry up, Brady Boyd doesn't keep this ministry going. If the donations dry up and nobody's attending that church and giving to that church, Jimmy Witcher doesn't take care of his boy, Brady Boyd. If the donations dry up, these overseers aren't going to answer his questions and don't want to be talked about in the public, right? So at the end of the day, with the money we give, the time we give, and our attendance, we have a voice. We have a voice. And then again, guys, it's not just parishioners, not just these church leaders. Anything New Life that you could actually put out in the public. I know you may be scared. I know you may be scared Dude will sue you. Everybody in the world is scared of getting sued today, and that is real. Like, look, I got to talk to a lawyer later today, because we're trying to do our best to be above reproach. But sometimes we got to be brave enough to say this is a kingdom issue. And if I'm going to have other church leaders try to silence me just because they're going to try to sue me and get the government involved, this is a kingdom religious issue. My God said the church would be something different, and I cannot stand for this. Right? So look, be careful, New Life, but if there's anything that you could share, I would encourage those elders to share it, because if the information you say you have is true, then it feels dangerous that Brady Boyd would still be in ministry. And it feels dangerous that these people are covering for one another. And guys, it's one scandal after another. This form of governance, this group of people, there's all of these connections between the scandals. There are, and this is how we started in the live stream today, there are patterns to these issues. And until we address the roots of the patterns, they're going to keep happening. And I don't know about you, but I'm really, really tired of seeing this stuff happen in the church. We're better than that. Jesus has called us to be better than that. So I hope that you would join me, because guys, I hope I don't have to spend the rest of my life doing this, but I'm willing to if I need to. I'm hoping there's not a need because reformation comes before then. But if I have to spend the rest of my life doing this, I will do everything that I can to make sure that those of you leaders who are hurting people, who are trying to act like kings, who are trying to avoid accountability, who are in this, man, Christian mafia looking network covering for each other, if I had to spend the rest of my life trying to do everything I can to shine the light on you, I'm going to do it. Because what happens when we turn the light on bright enough, the cockroaches scurry. And some of y'all need to scurry because we need all of us. We need all of us. And you can do more when you all start doing this together than I could ever do with a voice like this. Let's take a stand as the body of Christ. And guys, when something's happening in our body that shouldn't be, let's call it the cancer it is and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore. When we do that, when enough of us do that, that's when reform comes. All right. We will get into the chat a little bit. Looks like Tracy's been able to join us, so she has been handling some of the comments as well. Tracy, if you ever want to jump in today, you can just add yourself to the stage if you got anything to say, but I'm so grateful that you were here. But I will try to get through some of the more comments. I got to be off in the next 20 minutes, but we got some time. We got some time to chat a little bit here. So I'll see what you guys have been involved in the chat. We'll start with Life on Hoth. It says these churches kind of remind me of cigar clubs and country clubs. Should not be called churches. Sadly, too many of them look like that. And what's really funny about that, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a cigar club, to each their own. That's not the point of this discussion. But I actually worked for I worked for someone who was a pastor at one of these large churches who was actually a part of a cigar club at one point with these other people that he wanted to hobnob with. So that's actually kind of a real thing that I've seen. So it stands out to me. RJ says it just seems like a big money making thing, tax exempt way they have found to make money. It's a shame this is what it's turned into. And I agree, RJ, but do you see how easy it is? Like if we start requiring these churches, if we're going to support them, if they took steps like the Safe Church Pledge, you have to be so much more transparent than these churches are being, that it would make them super uncomfortable. It makes this stuff way harder to do. It's why, like, one of our values is that we want to set the example. So I just finished up a project so that we can start getting monthly income statements, revenue statements out, so that people can see where all the money's going. And we want to do that more often rather than just a couple of times a year, right? We're trying to set the example and trying to even do more to show churches this is not that difficult. Like if you want people to trust you and donate to you, trust them and let them know where the money's going. Let them know what is going on. Don't hide behind, essentially another church as a shell corporation. So it's frustrating, but it feels like it would be really easy for us to fix, but we got to raise our voices together. Angela says it reminds me of the government worker lobbyist pipeline. Incestuous loops within loops within loops. Angela, we actually have that word that you use. I read it before I even realized what it was, or I probably wouldn't have read it. There are certain words the algorithm doesn't like. I've had a podcast episode I've literally wanted to do since we started Church Disrupted, before SAI was a thing, and it is that word with the church. And that's the whole topic that I wanted to cover. And the whole reason why we haven't done it is because I'm still trying to figure out a better way to say it, but been building on it, been tracing webs and connections in these networks. And it would surprise you. You have groups of people that you would think would never be theologically connected. And when you start tracing those webs, you realize that even though they may be on opposite spectrums theologically, they are connected to the same network. So yeah, it's a big issue. And one of these days we're going to be able to share it with you, but I'm still bringing things together on that and also trying to figure out a better way to say it that the algorithm won't completely hide. Life on Hoth says require accountability from the get-go. It's easy to fall even for people who mean well or did mean well at some point. I think you're spot on there because, and again, not everybody agrees with me. I really do think though that the majority of pastors who were out there started with good hearts for good reasons. Not all of them. Okay. And I know when I interviewed the religion business guys, they said, hey, we definitely think it's less people who started with good hearts than you thought. When I talked to people like Ruslan, he's like, I think it's more people, than you thought. But there are a lot of good pastors out there who started with good hearts. The problem is we're all capable of this stuff if we don't have real accountability. So anyway, it gets wild out there. And then Angela says at this point, I would not be surprised at all seeing these things happen. So anyway, guys, I appreciate y'all. Y'all been great in the chat today. I know there's been some heavy stuff that we talked about. There's a lot of information thrown at you, but once you see it, like once you see this stuff, especially the governance structure, lack of accountability, I hope that you're seeing what I'm seeing, because once you see it, I don't think you can unsee it. And it becomes much easier to recognize. And a lot of these unaccountable church systems have been hidden for a long time because they're baptized in Christian language. They're baptized in stuff that sounds good, but in reality, it just doesn't hold water under scrutiny. So hopefully you're being encouraged that you're starting to know what to look for. You're starting to see more of those red flags to look for. But also I hope that you're encouraged that even though, yeah, I mean, you got this, what feels like at times this whole network covering for each other, and it feels like we're never going to make a dent. But once you start seeing how it works, I hope that you're encouraged that yes, we all have a voice. We can bring accountability, and I don't think it's going to take a whole lot to topple this this whole broken system that is not anything like what Jesus called us to do. Right? We got corporations masquerading as churches. It's causing a lot of issues. But again, they will only stand if that's what we're supporting. We all have a role to play. Every time we have a conversation about these sort of things, man, it makes a difference. So have a conversation with somebody, ask some questions in your church, support churches that are moving toward accountability, like we talked about earlier in the stream. When you see churches doing these other things and handling them like Trinity, or handling them like Brady Boyd has, or these others, like when you see that sort of stuff, ask questions. And if they're not willing to answer those, move on, find another place. We got to put our support where there's actually accountability, though. We got to put our support and our encouragement where there are churches that are doing the things that we know are going to protect people. And guys, at the end of the day, where there are churches that are being the church, Jesus set a great standard for us. We see it all throughout the New Testament. We know what church is supposed to look like. And we're not perfect. There's a lot of warts. There's a lot of mistakes. But we know what church is supposed to look like. And at the end of the day, the church, it's a city on a hill. It's a bright light that should be drawing people toward Jesus. So I pray that our conversations are bringing more of that. I want to say a special thank you to Tracy today. Tracy, you're so helpful when you're here. When you weren't here, man, we noticed it. Everybody noticed it because we had some people wilding out in the chat earlier. So thank you, Tracy, for everything that you do. Abby, being able to jump in later as a moderator, thank you for all that you do. We appreciate all of our moderators, and we appreciate our producer, and hopefully over time we're going to be adding some more of you guys to that. So if you are someone who's on the chat a lot and you're interested in being a moderator, that's something where I'm trying to extend more trust there. So if you're interested in doing that and say I'm on these chats a lot, let me know. We want people to be able to disagree with us. I want people to be able to disagree with me. Like in this chat, they can call me, hey, dude, you're ugly and you got a receding hairline and you're this, that, and the other. They can say whatever they want. Okay. I can be disagreed with, but they don't need to be, saying things that are not trauma informed. They don't need to be saying things that are moving other people out of the chat. They don't need to be trying to sell stuff, all of that. You guys know what that looks like. So civil disagreement, I'm down with it all day long. But if you're interested in becoming a moderator and just helping us keep tabs on when people start crossing that line in the chat, let them know, give them a warning. And then if they keep crossing that line, even if you're wrong, if they come to me and you remove somebody I wouldn't remove, I'll listen to them. I'll come talk to you about that. But if they try to come talk to me and they didn't listen when you put up a boundary and just kept crossing the line, then at that point, then we just weren't honoring each other, right? So if any of you are interested in doing that and you're able to be on the chats a lot, just let me know. But we appreciate everybody who pours into these live streams, pours into the podcast. That's it for today. This should be our last live stream, unless something comes up in the next 12 hours or so. It's going to be our last live stream for this week. We'll be back next Tuesday and next Thursday around 1 p.m. Eastern time. But guys, love you. Grateful for you. We'll see you then.